Hiraku is a 39-year-old cancer patient who lived such a miserable life that he actually wanted to die. One day, his wish finally comes true, his heart monitor flatlines, and he dies instantly. After his death, Hiraku finds himself in a strange place. At first, he assumes it must be heaven, but then, a god appears before him. The god explains that he's going to give Hiraku a second chance at life, since his first one was so terrible. This time, he promises to grant him a healthy body that won't betray him like the old one. The god apologizes sincerely for letting Hiraku live such a sad life. To make up for it, he asks if Hiraku has any requests for his new life and body. Since this god can grant any wish imaginable, the possibilities are endless. But Hiraku only has one request. He wants to live his next life as a farmer. The god blinks, surprised by such a strange request. Out of everything possible, farming. Still, Hiraku explains that while stuck in the hospital, he once watched a show about farmers and thought they were cool. Amused, the god decides to grant the wish anyway. On top of that, he gives Hiraku a bonus gift, the almighty farming tool, a tool with incredible powers. With that, the god transports him, and Hiraku wakes up lying on the ground in the middle of a forest. The first thing he feels is excitement. He finally has a healthy body. For the first time in years, he can look forward to a peaceful, laid-back life as a farmer. Examining himself, he notices he looks a lot younger than before. Unfortunately, he also looks a lot uglier than he used to. To make it worse, the god spawned him in a dollar store outfit. Hiraku sighs at his appearance but brushes it off. Testing out the almighty farming tool, he summons a hoe. To his amazement, it lets him dig as many holes as he wants without ever getting tired. Impressed, Hiraku starts exploring the forest, but reality quickly sets in. He needs somewhere safe to stay. After all, there's a good chance monsters or dangerous creatures could be lurking around. He stumbles upon a large, sturdy-looking tree and decides this would be a good spot to set up his base. But there's another problem: water. He can't find any rivers or wells nearby, and he'll need water to survive. So he summons his almighty farming tool again, which transforms into a shovel and starts digging. The tool is incredibly useful since it can change into many different things. The only limitation is that it can't become complicated machines. Still, it makes digging easy. Hiraku keeps digging and digging until, finally, he strikes water. With that, he now has a well. Now that water is taken care of, the next priority is food. Oddly enough, even after all this digging, Hiraku doesn't feel hungry at all. Still, he figures it would be smart to have food ready, just in case. He decides hunting will need to be added to his plans. For now, though, the main agenda is building a hut. Using the almighty farming tool, he chops down trees easily and cuts them into neat blocks of lumber, ready for construction. But once he starts, Hiraku realizes building a hut is way harder than he expected. He starts thinking about all the factors that go into it: design, stability, materials, layout, and before he knows it, he's lost track of time. The sun is already setting. Hiraku needs a light source fast. He tries summoning something like a flashlight or a lamp using the farming tool, but nothing comes out. Apparently, those don't fall under its farming jurisdiction. Another restriction from the god. He then tries summoning a magnifying glass and it works, but he quickly realizes it's useless at night, so he sets it aside. That night, Hiraku digs a small hole in a tree and spends the night there. Sleeping is tough, though, so he keeps himself busy by making some wooden furniture. To his surprise, it turns out better than he expected. The next day, he clears out all the trees and bushes on his land so he can start cultivating it. Just as he's about to begin, a rabbit monster suddenly dashes at him with murderous intent. One swift strike from the almighty farming tool to its head is all it takes. Hiraku then uses the monster's meat to prepare lunch for later that afternoon. Next on his agenda is building a toilet. At first, it offers little privacy, so he adds walls around it, making it more civilized. He spends the rest of the day cultivating the land to grow crops, and by sunset, he's accomplished a lot. However, he doesn't have any seeds yet. He decides to sleep that night and venture into the forest the next day to find seeds or fruit. When he wakes up, Hiraku is surprised to see that plants have already started sprouting, even though he didn't plant any seeds. Clearly, this is the power of the almighty farming tool at work. To protect the crops from beasts like the rabbit monster, he builds a fence around the cultivation area. Hiraku waters the plants every day, and they continue to grow rapidly. He isn't sure what kind of plant it is, but he hopes it's something edible. After a few more days of hard work, he successfully builds himself a log house. Halfway through, he gets so tired he can't lift a log to the roof, so he digs a little into the ground to give himself more vertical space. The next day, while carrying out his usual farm duties, Hiraku spots two giant dogs. At first, they seem aggressive, but they're actually friendly and in rough shape. Hiraku welcomes them onto his land and feeds them some of the meat he has. One of the dogs has a big belly, so Hiraku assumes she's either pregnant or just eats a lot. Taking care of these dogs makes him think back to the days when he always wanted a dog. Now, he's seriously considering keeping them around. Just then, the pregnant dog makes a poopy face, which Hiraku interprets as a sign that she's about to give birth. He brings them into his log house and starts planning for the delivery, but he's never watched those nature documentaries, so he has no idea how to handle it. That evening, Hiraku leaves the dogs in the log house and sleeps in the tree hole, thinking the dogs will prefer some privacy while delivering the puppies. The next day, he checks on them and finds that the puppies have been successfully born. They're surprisingly cute. Hiraku had expected the dogs to leave once they gave birth, but they've grown attached to his home and don't want to leave. Realizing this, Hiraku decides to build a bigger and better house for himself while leaving the log house for the dogs. Not long after, the crops are ready to harvest and they're actually tomatoes. Hiraku tastes them and confirms they're definitely tomatoes. As for the dogs, he gives them names. The male is Kuro and the female is Yuki. Meanwhile, the god wonders how Hiraku has been holding up since getting his new life, but that's when he realizes he screwed up again. He accidentally sent Hiraku into a very dangerous forest, so dangerous that it's regarded as the forest of death. He realizes he has to bring him back immediately, but then remembers that would be an infraction of the rules, which clearly say he can't interfere with the life he's given someone. The god figures that Hiraku is likely going to die in that world and return back to him. Then, when he does, he'll set things right. However, Hiraku is doing a lot better than expected. He's been able to use the almighty farming tool to harvest several crops. The tool works by him imagining whatever he wants to cultivate, and then the seeds are sown into the ground automatically. They end up sprouting so fast that he doesn't even know what to do with all of them. All in all, Hiraku realizes that he's only here thanks to the gods, which is why he built them a statue to honor them. That day, Hiraku decides to try something new and plants some fruit-bearing trees. He figures that if this goes well, his diet will greatly improve. He once heard that fruit trees take years to bear, but he's still prepared to wait as long as it takes for them to bear. That aside, Kuro and Yuki have really kept Hiraku company for the time he's been here. If not for them, he probably would have been really lonely. He notices they have horns on their heads, but doesn't think much of it. Since this is a new world and dogs here could just have horns, they've also been really helpful, often guiding him through the forest until he discovered a river, which he'll now be using as his main source of water. As for a means of transportation, he transformed his almighty farming tool into a wheelbarrow, which allows him to transport things as fast as he wants without getting tired. But the roads are a bit bumpy, so he knows he'll need to fix those eventually. It doesn't take long for winter to start approaching, and Hiraku figures he needs to start making preparations for it. He tries using the pelt from rabbit monsters, but those stink really bad. With that, his only option is to light his fire and stay inside his hut. Then, one day, he randomly comes across a spider who is able to use his spider webs to make good cloth and even clothes. Hiraku figures the spider would be useful and adds him to the squad, giving him the name Zabuton. Zabuton is able to make a cool jacket for Hiraku, which he'll be able to use during winter time, and also makes a lot of other cool items Hiraku can use around the house. Winter finally arrives, but thanks to the preparations he made, Hiraku is able to make it through just fine. The dogs are all cozy inside, but Zabuton might be hibernating or something since he hasn't come down from his hut in a while. Everything seems to be going well for now, but there's one big problem. Hiraku hasn't spoken to an actual person in a long time. He's starting to get really lonely and even fears that he might forget how to talk. Shortly after, spring arrives. The puppies, who have now grown, venture into the forest to find girlfriends. It doesn't take them long to meet other forest dogs, and they quickly come back and introduce them to Hiraku. On top of that, Zabuton appears to have given birth. Hiraku knows this means more mouths to feed, so he realizes he'll have to work even harder to keep up with everything. Just then, Zabuton sounds the warning alarm. Hiraku immediately understands that something unusual is happening in the forest, so he ventures in to investigate. While exploring, he spots a little girl cowering by a tree. The moment she sees him, she calls out for help. Hiraku walks over to her to ask what's going on, but as soon as he gets close, she grabs him and bites his neck. Now, this kind of thing is exactly the kind of scenario Hiraku is into, so he blushes a bit. The girl then undergoes a transformation. Her clothes change into a nice outfit, and she appears much older. However, Hiraku's dogs immediately start attacking her. Seeing her as a threat, she reacts defensively, but Hiraku quickly urges the dogs to stop immediately. The girl then explains to Hiraku that she bit him because it's the only way she can recover her strength. She also says that she got attacked in the first place because she thought she could take on one of the dogs. Seeing this, Hiraku realizes she's harmless and even offers to let her drink some more of his blood. After that, he brings her over to his farm. She's surprised to see all the crops because she's never seen anything like them before. She takes a bite of a tomato and is genuinely impressed by the taste. The rest of the day is spent having fun and bonding. For Hiraku, this is the first time in a long while that he's had human interaction, so he really enjoys spending time with her. At the end of the day, she introduces herself as Lucy, a vampire. She explains that she came to the forest to research medicinal herbs, but she got into a fight with some nobles who were trying to steal her research. She needed somewhere safe to hide, and the forest was the best option. Hiraku notices her pull up a panel, which he assumes is magic. Clearly, magic must exist in this world. Thinking all this over, Hiraku stares at Lucy and realizes he may never encounter a baddie like her again. Acting impulsively, he immediately proposes to Lucy, asking her to stay with him forever. He explains that the reason he set up his base here was so that he could live alone in peace, away from everyone else. Lucy blushes at this sudden proposal, but after thinking it over for a while, she agrees since she doesn't really have anywhere else to go. The next day, they both come out of the cabin after a rough night together. Lu asks what they're going to be doing today. Hiraku says he was planning on checking on the fruit trees to see how they're growing. Lu says she'll join him, but she wants to freshen up first. After all that, they both sit down and start to discuss, but that's when Zabuton sounds the alarm. Hiraku already knows what that means, so he and Lu venture into the forest to see what that's about. Hiraku arrives and sees a scene that's all too familiar to him, a hot girl tied to a tree. On seeing Hiraku, she screams, asking him for help. Hiraku obviously unties her, and after he does, the girl uses her magic to freshen herself up. Meanwhile, Lu is silently trying to make a break for it, but the girl stops her, asking her to come over to her immediately. Apparently, they know each other. They both take her back to the hut, where Hiraku comes to understand that she and Lu are in the same boat, both running away from the nobles. She introduces herself as Tia, an angel, and asks Lu who the guy with her is. Lu blushes while saying he's her husband. Hiraku blushes as well, mostly because this is the first time she has ever called him that. Tia is really surprised to hear that. That aside, Hiraku asks Tia why an angel like her was trying to track Lu down. Tia explains that, first of all, angels are more warriors than purely holy beings. Aside from that, there has been a giant bounty placed on Lu because of all the damage she caused when she went on a rampage. Back then, Lu would spend all her time researching strange medicines and concoctions, and then as soon as something bothered her, she would just start blowing things up. The nobles got so angry at that they placed a bounty on her head. Hearing all this, Lu admits that she might have gone a little too far back then, but she is surprised to hear Tia actually knows about it, because Lu is not the kind of person to show any sign of weakness. Lu explains it's because she realized firsthand how weak she was when she faced Hiraku's dogs. That aside, she excitedly asks Tia if she wants to join them living in the forest. Tia hesitates for a few seconds but ultimately agrees. That aside, Lu shows Tia around the entire farm and even introduces her to Zabuton, but she doesn't seem to be a fan of spiders. Tia is going to be helping with some of the farm work too, so after a long day of harvesting crops, she is exhausted, but Tia and Lu use their magic to clean themselves up instantly, which makes Hiraku wish he could really do that. They go inside, and Hiraku gives Tia a taste of the strawberry he harvested that day. Tia Tia finds it very delicious and adds that the farming work is a lot more fulfilling than she expected. That said, Tia makes up her mind and decides to stay here with them. In subsequent days, she begins helping them with the farming activities. Tia says she wants them to plant more strawberries, but Hiraku tells her that won't be possible because they don't have the farming capacity or enough people to harvest them in addition to their other crops. Tia suggests they get more help on the farm, but Hiraku doesn't think that would be a good idea. He reasons that if they grow too much, they wouldn't be able to eat all they've harvested. As they walk, Hiraku runs into more of Kiro and Yuki's grandpuppies. Grandpuppies because their own puppies went on to have puppies of their own. Zabuton's children have multiplied as well, but half of them decide to leave the forest to look for a better life, while the other half stay behind. Tia then speaks up, saying that she has a journey to embark on her own, but promises that she'll be back as soon as possible. At first, Hiraku worries that she's about to abandon him, just like Zabuton's kids did, but she reassures him not to worry, saying she'll return soon. A couple of days later, Tia comes back just as she promised, but this time she brings some elf girls along with her. The one in charge introduces herself as Lee, and all of them have similar names because they're closely related. Lee explains that they came here because Tia suggested they come and stay with Hiraku, so they ask if they can live here with them. Tia explains that the elves share a very sad backstory. They all used to live in a village far to the north, but their village was wiped out, and their race was scattered. Ever since then, they've been searching for a place to settle down and call home. Without a place to settle, they won't be able to repopulate their race and might eventually go extinct. Because of this, they all beg Hiraku to let them stay with him. Hiraku thinks about it for a while and then tells them that there are already a lot of different species living here, so as long as they promise to get along with everyone, it's fine. The elves agree but are curious about who the other species are. Lu shows them Zabuton, the spider, and all of the elves faint in fright. Now that the number of people living there has increased, Hiraku decides to start by making one big house for all of them to live in, since all 7 elves want to live together. Next, he makes a toilet and a garbage disposal area. The elves help with the construction, and in about 10 days, everything is complete. As Hiraku sees them all sitting in the dining area with smiles on their faces, he says he really hopes this place will become a space that is comfortable and safe for everyone. It doesn't take long for the elves to get accustomed to life on the farm. They begin harvesting crops and tasting them to figure out which ones they like and which ones they don't. One day, while Hiraku and Lee are segmenting crops, Hiraku is surprised to find out that even though Lee is an elf, she uses fire and eats meat. He's shocked because he always thought elves were creatures who lived in harmony with nature, only eating fruit from trees and refusing to wear anything made of metal. Upon hearing his thoughts, Lee's expression turns serious. She tells Hiraku that if he chooses to live like that, thinking elves are gentle tree dwellers, it won't be long before he's dead in this forest. The next day, Hiraku is about to begin his farming work for the day, but that's when Zabuton draws his attention and shows him the giant queen bee she caught. At first, Hiraku thought Zabuton would just eat it, but Zabuton says she wants to keep it as a pet. Hiraku doesn't have a problem with that, so he builds a house for the queen bee and her worker bees. The worker bees are normal sized, while the queen bee is the only one who is large. After that, Hiraku spent more of his time digging the space for the reservoir, but the major problem for him was getting the water to the reservoir. That's when Lee gives him the idea of building a pipe that leads all the way from the river to the reservoir space. So with that idea, everyone begins working together in mass production mode, and after a little while, the pipe leading to the reservoir has successfully been built and connected as the water is seen flowing in. Some fishes get carried along, so Hiraku roasts them and decides they use them for their lunch. Tia and Lu see the fish Hiraku is using and recognize them to be a very ferocious species from the Forest of Death, so they wonder if it's even safe for them to eat it. Hiraku offers them to eat, but they refuse, saying he should take the first bite. Someone has to be the guinea pig, and it's definitely not going to be them. Hiraku tastes the fish and remarks, saying it's delicious. After that, Tia and Lu taste some and agree with Hiraku, saying it's delicious. Everyone ended up enjoying the fish, so he prepared all the fish he had and used it for their meal. They even ended up catching a lot more than they could eat at once, so they just preserved the rest with some salt and kept it in their pantry. Up next, now that they have a water reservoir, Hiraku decides to make a rice paddy where they would be able to harvest some rice. He starts up by digging a regular looking existing farm plot. Then he fills both plots with water. He then asks for the help of the elves to plant each individual rice stalk. Not long before, the rice paddy is now fully grown and ready for harvest. It ended up growing a lot faster than Hiraku expected. Then after, they harvest the rice using their scythes and store the stalks in the house. But that's not the end of it. Hiraku spends the next hour threshing the rice until it's now become fine grains of rice. Lu and Tia observe the gruesome process involved in rice making and wonder whether it's even worth it at this point. But Hiraku assures them, saying it's very worth it. After that, Hiraku goes outside to cook the rice, and after it's done, he makes them into rice balls and serves them on a tray, asking Lu and Tia to give it a try. They all taste the rice balls and find it to be really delicious. He used the fish from earlier to make filling for the rice balls. Even though the elves end up eating all the rice balls, Hiraku is just happy to see that they liked it. Next time, he'll probably even do a different filling. The next day, after a long day of work at the rice paddy, everyone else uses their magic to clean themselves up, which makes Hiraku kind of jealous of them. So because of that, he decides to make a bath. It shouldn't be that hard since he already made a waterway. That said, Hiraku begins construction, but after a little while, he realizes that a huge problem is where their bath water is going to go after they're done bathing. He doesn't think it would be right for them to just dump it back into the river. Hearing that, Tia comes up with the solution of using cleaner slimes to purify their bath water, then they'll be able to use it again. On top of that, Tia believes the cleaner slimes would also be helpful when it comes to cleaning the bathrooms. Now they don't have to do it themselves anymore. With that problem out of the way, they successfully construct the bath at the end of the day. Hiraku takes his clothes off to demonstrate how the bath is being used. So he goes inside and first of all rinses his body before he goes inside the tub to take a dip. On seeing that, all the girls get inside the bath with Hiraku, saying it feels nice taking a bath with him. This is the kind of thing Hiraku fantasized about in his former life, so all he can do is stay quiet. The next day, Lee brings some of the other elves from her village, who ask Hiraku if it'll be okay for them to stay in the village like Lee is doing. Hiraku doesn't have any complaints, so he agrees. Lee suggests they immediately start making preparations to make a new house for the incoming elves to live in. Lee is really excited. She says she's really happy they're finally going to be able to repopulate their race. Hiraku isn't sure how they're going to make children since all the elves are girls, but he feels it's nice to see them so optimistic. Meanwhile, Kuro watches the scene and sees that Hiraku is already expanding his harem again. This makes him think back to how his life was so miserable before he met Hiraku. After he and his family got their butts kicked by a bear monster, they were wounded and had no reason to keep going. But that's when they came across Hiraku. At first, they thought of him to just be some weak human, but after they saw the immense power the almighty farming tool carried, they immediately began to respect him. Hiraku was kind enough to take them in as one of his own, so Kuro is very grateful. But what he doesn't know is that their species are terrifying monsters known as the Inferno Wolves. But they don't have any intention of harming him, so they feel everything should be fine. A couple of days go by and their new and improved house is now complete since they had to make adaptations for the new elf residents. The house is a giant mansion with Hiraku's room being the best since he's the founder of their village. The girls give Hiraku a tour of the house and he's loving every part of it. The girls have their own rooms and Hiraku is delighted to see they're happy with how things turned out. Then he notices a room that has a bolt lock on it, so he wonders what could be in there. He opens it and sees two beds joined together. Realizing what that is, Hiraku closes the door slowly, saying he's going to pretend he didn't see that. After the tour is over, Lee tells Hiraku that if he feels any part of the house isn't to his liking, he should just tell her and she'll make arrangements for it. So as a finishing touch to the house, he added 2 statues of the dogs in front of the house for aesthetic effect. The next day, Hiraku plans on making some curry, so he goes out to the farm with Tia and Lu to pick out some of the fresh ingredients for it. But after he's done selecting the ingredients, he finds out that they ditched him because they find making their curry from scratch is kind of lame. Hiraku is now left to prepare all the curry by himself, but Lee joins him after a while, saying she'd love to help him out. So with that, they begin the curry making process right from setting the oil to frying the beef. Now all that's left is for them to cover the pot and let it simmer until it's done. But that's when Hiraku realizes he forgot to make the naan wraps for the curry. He knows naan takes a while to make, so he starts to consider just making rice, but he changes his mind back to making naan because it's been a while he's had it and he's craving, even though that would mean he has to prepare it for everyone including all the elves. Still, he knows it's going to be sundown, so he immediately gets to work because he doesn't have time to waste. The curry is almost ready, so Tia and Lu can already smell the tempting aroma coming from there and wonder whether that's the curry Hiraku was blabbing about earlier. It's now dinner time at sunset, so as they taste the curry and naan, they admit that it's really delicious and commend Hiraku, saying he has real talent for cooking. Hiraku is just glad to see that they're really enjoying his cooking. Winter is gradually drawing near again, so Hiraku and the others begin making preparations for the winter by preserving their meat and storing their vegetables. That day, Hiraku sees Lu using her fire magic to smoke their meat. This makes Hiraku wish he could use magic, so he tries using it but fails woefully. That night, Hiraku strikes up a conversation with Lee, where he admits how cool he thinks they all are because they can use magic, while he does just farm and cook. However, Lee tells him that he's the most impressive out of them all because he managed to survive through the forest up until this point all on his own. That's not something that just anyone can do. Hearing this lightens Hiraku's mood a bit, making him realize he's important to them as well. Shortly after, winter arrives and snow begins to pile up outside. Because of this, the group spends most of their time indoors. To pass the time, Hiraku decides to make some board games like chess, mahjong, and reversi. After he explains the rules of reversi, Lu immediately finds it to be a rather simple game, but Tia quickly tells her it only looks simple because of the way the game is structured, and that during actual gameplay, strategies are what really matter the most. With that said, things suddenly get heated as Lu challenges Tia to a game on the spot. Meanwhile, in another room, the atmosphere is the complete opposite. Things are calm as Lee and one of the other elves quietly play their own game of reversi in silence. Just then, Kuro steps in and casually gives Lee a tip on a move she should make. Seeing this, Hiraku is surprised that Kuro actually knows the rules of the game, which he never expected. After a while though, the board games start to get boring, so Hiraku puts together a bowling set to mix things up. He demonstrates by showing off his bowling skills, but since he's a bit rusty, he ends up missing 2 pins. Still, Hiraku isn't sure whether it's because of the simplicity of the games or just the novelty of it all, but every single game he introduced to them turned out to be a huge hit, and just like that, the group spends their entire winter together inside, playing games day after day. But those winter days don't last long, because before they know it, spring quickly arrives. One morning, Hiraku and the girls step outside, planning to talk about what they're going to do today. But that's when Zabuton suddenly sounds the alarm. They all rush toward the direction of the alarm and spot a massive wyvern flying straight toward them. Seeing the wyvern attacking, Lee and the other elves rush over to the crop farm to try to minimize the damage being done. In that moment, Tia and Lu are left completely speechless because they don't know what to do. They doubt they're strong enough to break through the wyvern's barrier. Meanwhile, Hiraku is standing there, desperately trying to think of a decision to make. His first thought is that maybe they should run away, but he quickly realizes that wouldn't work, since the wyvern could easily just follow them from the sky. Hiraku knows he has to do something, and he has to do it now, or else both the village and the crops are going to be destroyed. Protecting everyone is the only thing on his mind at this point. So, he takes out his almighty farming tool, and right before their eyes, it transforms into a cool-looking spear. Without hesitation, Hiraku throws the spear directly at the wyvern. To everyone's surprise, the spear is powerful enough to completely shatter the wyvern's barrier and take it down with a single strike. Lu and Tia are stunned. They can't believe what they just witnessed. Neither of them had any idea Hiraku possessed such overwhelming power. After the wyvern is defeated, everyone manages to put out the fires in the crop fields. Some damage was done to the crops, but fortunately, it's only minimal. After that, the group heads into the forest to check on the wyvern's corpse. The first thing that comes to Hiraku's mind as he looks at it is whether or not they can eat it. In this world, wyvern meat is actually a well-known delicacy, so Hiraku wastes no time putting it to use and prepares a delicious lunch for everyone. Lu always assumed wyvern meat would be tough and chewy, but to her surprise, it's incredibly tender. As they eat, Lu turns to Tia and reminds her of Hiraku's spear strike. She then asks if Tia thinks she would be able to block that kind of attack if it were ever aimed at her. Tia quickly shakes her head and admits that there's no way she could. The spear was so powerful, it not only pierced the wyvern's barrier, but also went straight through its chest in a single strike. Meanwhile, Meanwhile, in the Demon Kingdom, Bezel, one of the 4 great generals, holds a meeting with his fellow generals, Randon and Grat. He tells them about the wyvern being taken down with a single blow. Both Randon and Gratz are shocked, unable to believe that such destructive power actually exists in the world. Randon, however, isn't interested in testing it. He firmly believes that kind of power would be impossible for them to handle, and trying to fight against it would only get them killed. Without hesitation, Randon stands up, announces his resignation, and walks out of the meeting. Back in the forest, Hiraku, still thinking about their meal from the other day, realizes there's one thing missing: wine. His plan for today is to start making some. He gathers a large amount of grapes and tosses them into a big bucket, having the girls stomp on them to extract the juice. By the end of the day, they've managed to fill 16 barrels with grape juice. Now all that's left is to let it ferment and wait for it to turn into wine. Meanwhile, up in the divine realm, the god who originally brought Hiraku into this world is being scolded by his own daughter, the goddess of agriculture. She berates him for screwing things up yet again, this time by dropping Hiraku into the forest of death. The god tries to defend himself, insisting that Hiraku is actually having fun there and doing just fine, but his daughter doesn't buy it. She continues to lecture him, adding that on top of everything, he even went so far as to give Hiraku a replica of the Holy Lance Grime. What she points out is terrifying, even though Hiraku is only using it for farming right now. That lance is capable of draining all of Hiraku's life force and killing him instantly. However, the god insists that it's unlikely anything bad will happen to Hiraku, because he gave him a body with extremely high regenerative properties. With that kind of body, Hiraku should be just fine. Even after hearing that, the goddess of agriculture still can't shake off the fact that her father messed up. To make sure he learns his lesson, she punishes him by sending him to stand in the corner for 300 years, telling him to spend that time reflecting on everything he's done wrong. The very next day in the forest, Zabuton suddenly sounds the alarm and rushes ahead. Following the signal, they discover yet another girl tied to a tree. Lu quickly recognizes her. It turns out the girl is her own sister, Flora. Hiraku takes Flora back to the house, and there she explains the situation. Apparently, Lu had a bounty on her head, and Flora came into the forest to look for her. Since Lu is married to Hiraku, that technically makes Flora his sister-in-law. Hiraku properly welcomes her, serving one of his best dishes and telling her she's welcome to stay with them for as long as she likes. Flora, just like Lu, is extremely passionate about research. After a few days of staying with them, she sets off to prepare her own research site. About a month later, Flora returns, but this time Hiraku is stunned to see she's not alone. She's brought along a large group of maids, her loyal underlings. The head maid introduces herself as Anne, bows respectfully, and tells Hiraku that they all wish to live here with everyone else. She also adds that he should feel free to put them to use however he sees fit. Not only that, but Flora's group even brought cows with them. Hiraku is thrilled by this addition, because now they'll finally be able to make butter and cheese. Seeing this, Tia starts to feel a little left out, realizing she's the only one who hasn't brought along her own underlings yet. Wanting to fix that, she sets off into the forest and eventually comes back with an army of angels and lizard men. To top it off, they even bring a chicken with them, which makes Hiraku extremely happy, because now they'll be able to enjoy eggs too. The roles in the growing village are quickly organized. The angels are put in charge of security, keeping everyone safe from threats in the forest. The lizard men are assigned to heavy outdoor labor that requires brute strength. Their leader, Daga, stands out thanks to the scarf Hiraku ties around his arm. Otherwise, Hiraku can't tell any of them apart. Not long after, Lee also brings even more elves to join them. But Hiraku can't help noticing that among all the elves she brought, there aren't any men, only women. Curious, he asks Lee about it. Lee explains that not many male elves survived, but she brushes it off as no problem, saying they'll just make more eventually. Hiraku, not wanting to ask any further questions about how they plan to do that, simply gives them a thumbs up and leaves it at that. With the rapid increase in the number of residents, Hiraku realizes his little place has now grown into a full-blown village. He decides to name it the Great Tree Village, with himself serving as the mayor. That night, everyone throws a big party to celebrate the occasion, dancing together while singing old-timey songs, enjoying their new life as a thriving community. The next day, one of the angels comes up to Hiraku and informs him that a messenger from the demon army has arrived to see them. The messenger turns out to be none other than Bezel. He explains that he wants to discuss their settlement with whoever is in charge of the village. Hiraku realizes that this is his first real duty as the mayor of Great Tree Village, so he steps forward and declares that he's the one in charge. Bezel begins by offering Hiraku a gift, then says he has a few questions regarding their settlement. Hearing this, Hiraku immediately remembers what Lu once told him, that all the land in this area, including the one they've settled on, actually belongs to the Demon King. That makes him wonder, did the Demon King send Bezel to kick them out, or is he here to demand taxes? Either way, Hiraku knows this is one of the biggest decisions he'll have to make as mayor. After thinking carefully, Hiraku tells Bezel that if the Demon King has any complaints about them being here, they're willing to pay a 10% tax for using the land. But he adds an important condition: the tax will only come from revenue generated on the crop farm, not from the animals. Bezel freezes for a moment at hearing this, shuddering at the low number. Seeing his reaction, Hiraku wonders if maybe 10% really is too low, but in the next moment, Bezel anxiously agrees to the offer. They head inside, sign the paperwork, and Bezel leaves for the Demon Kingdom. After he's gone, Hiraku asks the girls how he did. They tell him he did a fantastic job, since the usual tax rate is around 60 to 70%, but he somehow managed to lock in a deal for only 10%. On top of that, paying the tax means they now have the protection of the demon army. Meanwhile, back at the demon army's headquarters, Bezel is reporting to the other generals, and they're all shaking in their boots. Bezel explains that he saw Hiraku, the village mayor, standing alongside Lu, the vampire princess, Tia, the angel of annihilation, and a pack of inferno wolves. Just seeing those forces alone made it no surprise that they were able to defeat a wyvern. What shocked him even more was the fact that they willingly agreed to pay tax and become part of the Demon King's protection, despite their obvious strength. Even though the tax rate was absurdly low, Bezel knew he couldn't refuse. It was better to collect a little than risk them becoming enemies of the Demon Kingdom. Upon hearing this, Randon once again stands up and announces he's resigning immediately. The very next day, Drime, the Lord of Dragons, comes to pay a visit to Great Tree Village. His servant steps forward and presents Hiraku with a gift, a cool-looking sword. Hiraku accepts the gift, but asks why they traveled all the way to his village. The servant explains that Drime's lair is located a bit farther south. They aren't exactly close neighbors, but still close enough that Drime thought it proper to come by and pay them a visit. Drime then changes into his human form and properly introduces himself. Hiraku and the others invite him inside and treat him to some wine, but Drime drinks so much that he gets completely drunk, loudly declaring that he's going to stay here forever and never go back to his lair. His servant quickly tells him that wouldn't be such a good idea, since staying here permanently would probably just turn him into a nuisance for everyone. Realizing the truth in those words, Drime sobers up a bit, then flies back home at the end of the night. The following day, Hiraku reflects on Drime's visit. As much as he enjoyed hosting him, Hiraku admits he doesn't like the idea of random visitors constantly coming into their home. So, he suggests that they build a guest house large enough to accommodate about 30 people, a place specifically meant for receiving visitors. As the construction of the guest house began, they also came up with a new system just for visitors. Zabuton would ring a bell when guests arrived and strike a slab if enemies showed up. On top of that, they even formed a welcoming party whose job was to greet anyone who visited. After a little while, their preparations were complete, and soon enough, they received their first guests. This time, it was a group of beastmen. Lu went out to welcome them, but she instantly noticed that something felt strange about this group. She then revealed that she had sensed some of them hiding in the woods. However, Garf, the leader of the beastmen, quickly apologized, saying that the hidden ones must have followed without his permission. Lu accepted the excuse, but warned them to be careful during their stay. Once they were inside, the beastmen were impressed by the decorations of the guest house. Even so, the girls couldn't shake the suspicion that these beastmen were really enemies in disguise. For one, they hadn't brought any greeting gift like the other visitors had, and second, there were the two beastmen hiding in the forest. Because of these red flags, the girls decided to tone down the hospitality and purposely serve them a subpar meal. Hiraku honestly felt a little guilty about this, but he went along with it. Later, though, it turned out the beastmen weren't trying to trick anyone at all. In fact, they were there to discuss trade relations. Garf explained that their village wasn't interested in typical economic trade, but rather physical exchange. He then asked if Hiraku's village could come to their village instead for trading. He explained that traveling here had been very difficult and carrying goods back and forth would be far too much trouble. The beastmen dealt in things like paints, silverware, and glassware, all items that Hiraku found fascinating. He immediately said he wanted to buy everything. Just like that, the two sides came to an agreement. Drime even offered to handle the transport in exchange for a barrel of wine. Since Hiraku, as mayor, couldn't be the one to make the first trade trip, Tia volunteered to go instead. A few days later, she returned with Drime and proudly announced that the trade had been a success. All the products had been exchanged as agreed. Along with that, she also mentioned that the Beast Village's mayor had asked if some of their people could move here. Hiraku thought about it and admitted that extra workers would be helpful, so he agreed. Tia then revealed that the group consisted of 20 teenage girls. Hiraku froze when he heard this, realizing that their own village already had mostly women. If this went on, the future of the village would be in danger. Because of that, he firmly said he would only accept them if the beastmen also sent at least 2 young men. Not long after, the beastmen arrived, and their leader, a teenage girl named Sina, nervously greeted Hiraku. She told him that he could use her however he liked as long as he didn't abandon her. Hiraku just smiled kindly and reassured her that she didn't have to worry about being kicked out. Hearing that, Sina smiled back in relief. Afterward, Hiraku asked about the young men he had requested. Sina then revealed 2 boys, but they were only 11 years old. Though much younger than Hiraku expected, he looked at them and realized they represented the future of the village from now on. Sina and the other beastmen at first thought they would be treated like trash here, but to their surprise, Hiraku and everyone else have been nothing but kind. Because of that, they're actually enjoying their stay, though it will still take some time for them to get used to living among so many different species. One day, while Hiraku is watching the beast kids play, the ground suddenly shakes with a powerful earthquake. An angel quickly descends and informs him that the shaking is being caused by a bear and a viper locked in a brutal battle not far from the village. The angel wonders whether they should interfere or simply observe, while Hiraku, on the other hand, is busy thinking about whether the creatures would taste good to eat. The angel then flies Hiraku to the forest where the fight is happening. Once lowered closer to the battle, Hiraku lands a single strike with his spear and instantly takes down both beasts. The other angels are shocked, amazed that Hiraku is so powerful when they had never expected it. They haul the bear and viper back to the village, where their meat is prepared into a delicious lunch. The fried viper tastes almost exactly like chicken tenders, so Hiraku decides it needs a proper dip. Right away, he sets out to make some mayonnaise, and once it's ready, Flora tries it and is impressed with how good it is. After that, Hiraku moves on to his next project, miso. He and Flora work together to prepare a batch, roll the mixture into balls, and store them in a barrel in the basement to ferment for months until it develops its full flavor. Just then, Lu comes to tell Hiraku that visitors have arrived. The newcomers turn out to be a group of elder dwarves led by a rough-looking man named Donovan. They had heard rumors that the Great Tree Village was producing quality wine, so they came hoping to share some. Hiraku is willing, but Lu immediately interrupts, saying they can't just give their wine away for free. Donovan admits that they don't have money to pay, but instead, they can offer technology in exchange. He explains that since the village produces so many crops, his people can show them how to turn those crops into alcohol. To prove it, the dwarves demonstrate by using the process of distillation to transform corn into corn whiskey. Hiraku tries a sip and admits it tastes authentic, though a little too strong for him. After this, both sides strike an agreement, and the dwarves officially join the Great Tree Village. To celebrate, they hold a big welcoming party. Everyone drinks and celebrates together, while Hiraku is especially happy that there are finally some men in the village. This means the elves can freely reproduce without worry. During the party, Hiraku leans over to Donovan and asks if there's any lady in the village that's caught his interest. Donovan admits that while all the women here are beautiful, they're not really his type. He says he prefers his women with thick, full beards. At that, Hiraku just sighs in defeat. The next day, Hiraku is going about his usual routine when he suddenly notices a giant dragon approaching the village. His first instinct is to take it down immediately, but before he can act, Drime shows up and confronts the dragon himself. Hiraku thinks everything is handled now, until he looks back and sees yet another dragon coming in from the distance. Knowing that it's his duty to protect the village, Hiraku quickly draws his spear and hurls it at one of the dragons. The attack nearly lands, but the dragon dodges at the very last second. Hiraku prepares to throw a second spear, but Drime's servant rushes forward and yells for him to stop. He explains that the two dragons are none other than Drime's wife and daughter. After the misunderstanding is cleared, the dragons transform into their human forms. Drime's wife introduces herself as Grafaloon, and his daughter introduces herself as Lasty. Grafaloon explains that she had grown suspicious because she noticed Drime sneaking out late at night and assumed he was cheating on her. This time, she decided to follow him to finally uncover the truth. Hearing this, Hiraku quickly clarifies that Drime wasn't cheating at all. He was simply coming to the village to drink. Grafaloon realizes her mistake, but argues she can't be blamed for suspecting him. After all, he was leaving in the middle of the night without saying anything, and even taking items from the treasury along the way. Once everything is cleared up, she and Lasty both apologize to Hiraku for causing such a commotion. Hiraku assures them it's no problem at all, and says he's just glad that everyone has made peace. Afterward, Drime quietly tells Grafaloon that it's extremely important to maintain a good relationship with the Great Tree Village. He admits that the village has enough power to overthrow their entire force if things ever turned hostile. Hearing that, Grafaloon decides it would be best if their daughter, Lasty, stayed in the village for a while. She believes this will ensure that their relationship remains positive and also help Lasty learn from the experience. Hiraku has no objections and welcomes her to the village. That's how Lasty began her new life there, but things don't go as smoothly as they did with the others who had joined before. Many of the residents are uneasy around her because of her intimidating dragon heritage. To make use of her presence, Hiraku appoints her to handle negotiations with visitors. The first test comes when Bezel arrives once again. The moment he lays eyes on Lasty, he trembles in fear, so much so that he agrees to every single offer on the spot, desperate not to upset her. Seeing how well this worked out, Hiraku smirks, realizing he made the perfect choice in putting Lasty in that role. Bezel later returns to the Demon Kingdom and reports what he saw. The generals panic, realizing that the Great Tree Village now has dragons among its allies. Wanting to evaluate their military strength more closely, Bezel decides to send his daughter, Florim, to spy on them. Before long, Florim arrives at the village. Since Bezel had already mentioned beforehand that his daughter would be staying there, everyone accepts her with open arms. As the day goes on, Florim carefully evaluates the village's military power, only to be stunned by what she discovers. She realizes they have enough strength to completely wipe out the entire Demon Kingdom if they chose to. Curious, she wonders what kind of person could be leading such a place. Her curiosity turns into shock when she learns that the mayor of the village, Hiraku, is actually a human. Lasty quickly warns her not to underestimate him, explaining that Hiraku is strong enough to even take on someone like her mother. Just hearing this makes Florim shudder. From that point on, she is completely convinced of Hiraku's strength. She begins treating him with great respect and becomes very stiff and formal whenever she speaks to him. A couple of weeks later, autumn rolls in, and with it comes the promise of plenty of delicious meals. Everyone gathers in the kitchen to prepare a hearty breakfast, but halfway through, they all realize something is missing: seafood. Lou remembers that she knows a merchant who can supply them with some, so they quickly set out on a journey south to make the request. 3 days later, the head merchant of Shishido City in the Demon Kingdom arrives at the village in response to their request. He thanks them first for calling on his services and then proudly displays the wide variety of seafood he brought with him. Hiraku is delighted with the selection. The merchant, who introduces himself as Michael, then explains that he has 3 reasons for coming. The first is to properly greet Hiraku and thank him for choosing their services. The second is to suggest new opportunities for trade and business with their village. And the third, his biggest hope, is to become the official government purveyor for the Great Tree Village. That would mean he alone would handle all of their trading affairs. Michael points out the quality of their crops and confidently says he can sell them at several times their normal value if entrusted with the role. Hiraku and the others talk it over, and they find his reasoning convincing, so they agree to it. Once everything is settled, they see him off, and Michael mounts the village's dragon to fly back home. As he departs, Tia admits that Michael seemed reliable and didn't give off any feeling of trying to deceive them. Hiraku adds that he hopes their relationship with him continues smoothly. Meanwhile, up in the sky, Michael drops his cool and composed act the moment he's out of sight. He trembles in relief, thanking the gods that he managed to make it out alive after dealing with the intimidating people of the Great Tree Village. Back at the village, Hiraku wastes no time putting the seafood to use, preparing a delicious meal that everyone enjoys, but their peaceful moment doesn't last long before they know it. Another dragon suddenly appears and begins attacking the village. Hiraku doesn't hesitate. He raises his almighty spear and takes the dragon down with ease. When he goes into the forest to see if the dragon's meat can be cooked, he finds that the beast has shifted into its human form. To his surprise, the dragon turns out to be Drime's older sister, Hakurin. Hakurin explains that she had once heard Drime drunkenly saying he would give his daughter to Hiraku as a bride. Curious, she decided to come here herself to see what kind of man Hiraku really was. Hiraku is baffled because he doesn't remember agreeing to any such arrangement. Drime sheepishly admits that he did say it, but only because he was drunk at the time. Hiraku then asks Hakurin why she didn't just introduce herself normally. She laughs and replies that she had always heard about how strong the village mayor was, so she wanted to test him first. Hiraku doesn't hold it against her, but he does tell her that before she enters the village, she'll need to clean up the mess she caused during her little test. Once she finishes tidying up, she is welcomed to the guest house, where she is served dinner. She fits right in with the others almost immediately. After eating, Hakurin casually mentions that she heard the game Mahjong is quite popular among them. She insists on playing. Hiraku assumes she doesn't know the rules and offers to explain them, but Hakurin waves him off, saying she'll just figure it out as they go. To make things more exciting, she suggests they place a bet on the outcome of the game. But Hiraku doesn't really have anything worth betting, so he suggests they just play strip mahjong, where the loser of each round has to take off a piece of clothing. Surprisingly, everyone agrees to it. Shortly after, the game begins, and the tension in the room is thick. The dragons are all extremely competitive and absolutely hate losing, so this strip mahjong turns into a very serious battle. Hiraku notices something strange. Hakurin is completely new to mahjong, and she's also wearing the least amount of clothing compared to the others, yet she plays with an almost dangerous level of confidence. Ever since the game started, Hiraku has been focusing hard on racking up points, but something feels off. He keeps losing every single round. Before long, he's already down to just his tighty-whities. He starts suspecting that Hakurin must be using her magic to cheat, but then again, if she really was cheating, someone else would have caught on by now. Just when Hiraku is at his lowest, the perfect chance presents itself. If he plays his next move correctly, he'll be able to flip the entire game in one shot. With hope in his heart, he throws down his Mahjong tile, only for his bad luck to strike again. The tile ends up ruining his plan, and he loses yet another round. The girls immediately burst out chanting for him to take off his pants, and since Hiraku is a man of his word, he does so, standing there in nothing but his shame, revealing his bite-sized wiener for all to see. Meanwhile, in the Demon Kingdom, Bezel and the other generals are growing increasingly concerned. The Great Tree Village has now acquired Hakurin, a dragon known for her incredible power, and this makes them feel threatened. As they discuss their options, Galgardo interrupts with his own worries. His daughter has been acting moody and unpredictable lately, and he's not sure what's going on with her. Randon, however, takes one look at the situation and realizes they don't stand a chance at victory. Without another word, he leaves behind a letter of resignation on the table and simply vanishes. Back in the village, Hakurin is fitting in surprisingly well with everyone. She decides to stay for a while, and to Hiraku's surprise, she's skilled enough to handle almost any job assigned to her. That said, she never stops complaining about the tasks she's given. Ironically, despite her whining, she ends up being the one to teach the children reading, writing, and even math. Later that day, a group of hot, naked Lamia girls suddenly arrive at the village seeking help. They explain to Hiraku that some younger monsters attempted to clear out a dungeon they had found in the forest, which forced the Lamias to flee from their homes. Desperate, they came all the way here asking for aid and protection. Hiraku figures there's no way they can just turn them away, so they make a deal. The Lamias will trade the precious gems they mined in exchange for the village's crops. After that, the Lamia girls prepare to head back to their original homes. Before they leave, however, Hiraku insists they put on some clothes if they ever plan on visiting again. He hands them fabric, which they tie around their chest areas as makeshift tops. From then on, the Lamia girls set up a delivery service and start trading goods regularly regularly with the village. With all these new developments and good fortune piling up, Hiraku can't help but feel like the village is finally evolving to the next level. Meanwhile, in the Demon Kingdom, Princess Yuri hears rumors that Florum has been convinced to remain in the Great Tree Village. Some even claim she's being held hostage by whoever runs the place. Fired up by these half-truths, Yuri declares that they have no choice but to attack the village and take Florum back. At the same time, Beazle arrives at the village to inform Florum about this reckless plan. He explains that Yuri's followers have filled her head with lies, leading her to think Florum is being kept against her will. Florum, hearing this, admits it's a foolish idea. She knows their army would stand no chance against the sheer strength the Great Tree Village commands. Beazle agrees, fully aware of the gap in power, and tells her she's the only one who can prevent this invasion before it spirals out of control. The attack is scheduled for tomorrow, so Florum needs to act fast and convince the army to back down. When the demon army arrives, Florum has the Lamia girls confront them. The sight of the Lamia instantly terrifies the soldiers, making them realize just how hopeless a battle against this village would be. Following that, the three girls who pushed the princess into this invasion, Rosalind, Jolena, and Clacase, are dragged before Hiraku. In front of him, Florum declares that they've chosen to remain in the village for now, working under his command. She also tells him plainly that if they ever try to harm the village, he should feel free to dispose of them. The three freeze in fear at her words. As for Princess Yuri, she bows her head and submits as well. Florum explains to Hiraku that the princess isn't here to cause trouble, only to observe and see how life in the village is run. Yuri herself asks not to be treated any differently, insisting that he treat her like everyone else. With that, she begins her stay. The next day, Florum takes Yuri on a tour of the village. The princess marvels at the different crops and the way everything is managed so peacefully. But unlike her, the other girls are completely miserable. As nobles, they hate the idea of living in such a secluded place, far from luxury. That night, they secretly attempt to escape, but the wolves and spiders are already on guard and block every route. Realizing there's no way out, the girls give up and decide the only option is to behave themselves until they're eventually allowed to return home. Meanwhile, Yuri continues her tour with Florum. She admits she feels like a fool for ever considering war against such a peaceful and well-run village. Still, she points out it wasn't entirely her fault. Florum also vanished from the Demon Kingdom without any explanation, leaving everyone worried. With no word from her, the town hall girls convinced Yuri she had been captured. Florum realizes the misunderstanding is her responsibility and promises to keep Yuri informed from now on. Over time, the girls slowly adjust to life in the village. They find satisfaction in the work assigned to them and begin to settle into their new roles. As for Yuri, she spends her last day working alongside the beast children in the fields. When the farm girls try to stop her, insisting a princess shouldn't be doing such labor, they quickly realize her status was supposed to remain a secret and silence themselves. Yuri doesn't mind, she enjoys the hard work, admitting it's been a long time since she's felt this alive. At the end of the day, it's time for her to return home. She thanks everyone warmly, promises to visit again, and leaves the Great Tree Village with newfound respect for both Hiraku and his people. As for the other girls, they had by now grown surprisingly accustomed to life in the Great Tree Village. What started as reluctance slowly turned into comfort, and eventually they insisted on staying for a while longer. Yuri didn't object in the slightest. She simply left them behind, saying they could do as they pleased, and made her way back to the Demon Kingdom on her own. Not long after Yuri's departure, the village began its pre-winter crop harvest. The yield was massive, so much so that the storage areas couldn't possibly contain it all. Faced with this problem, Lasti stepped forward and asked if she could send a portion of the extra harvest to her father. Hiraku thought it over, then gave her his approval. Right after that, Hakurin spoke up, saying she also wanted to deliver some of the surplus to her parents who lived in the south. Hiraku agreed to that as well, so Hakurin set out on her journey carrying supplies. When she returned, however, she didn't come back alone. With her was a group of mountain elves who had followed her, hoping to settle in the village. Their leader, a woman named Ya, explained their situation. Normally, they lived peacefully in the mountains, but recently their food supplies had become scarce and survival had grown difficult. Hearing this, Hiraku considered their plight seriously before agreeing to let them stay in the village. Ya was overjoyed at his generosity. She declared that she would even be willing to sleep on the floor if that's what it took. But Hiraku immediately stopped stopped her, saying there was no way he would allow that. He promised to arrange proper accommodations for all of them. From that moment, Ya felt deeply indebted to Hiraku for his hospitality, determined to repay him. She tried her very best to be helpful around the village. Unfortunately, every attempt ended in complete failure, and instead of being useful, she often caused more problems. One day, while Hiraku was working, he casually mentioned that he needed clay for a project. Hearing this, Ya took it upon herself to head into the forest alone, swearing she wouldn't return until she had found some. After some time, she came back proudly carrying clay in her arms, and Hiraku was delighted by her success. During her search, Ya had also stumbled across something unusual, a nearby dungeon, one that seemed very different from the ones the Lamia girls lived in. She reported this to Hiraku, who, intrigued, decided to send out a survey party to investigate. However, he specifically instructed them not to do anything drastic. The survey team returned shortly after with alarming news. They had discovered evidence of a blood viper living inside the dungeon. Since blood viper meat was said to be extremely valuable, they immediately suggested forming an extermination party and heading north to take it down. Hiraku, however, told them such a matter needed to be discussed and agreed upon by the whole village before taking action. Before long, winter arrived. As the cold season set in, everyone began to notice that Lu hadn't been feeling well. She had been unusually sick, often vomiting and looking pale. At first, no one connected the dots, but after a while, the truth dawned on them. Lu wasn't just sick, she was pregnant. Ever since the news broke that Lu was pregnant, the whole village's mood brightened. Spirits were high, everyone seemed cheerful, and even Hiraku found himself acting differently. Now that he realized he was about to become a father, he knew it was time to step up and take real responsibility. He began giving Lu extra care and attention, always making sure she was comfortable. But Lu, calm as ever, reassured him not to worry so much. She insisted she'd be just fine. About an hour later, Anne finished preparing breakfast for everyone. The only problem was, there were simply too many people to fit into the dining hall at once, so the meal had to be divided into 3 separate groups. The first group included Hiraku himself along with the leaders of each species. The second group was made up of the regular members, while the third group consisted of those who couldn't fit into the second seating. In the middle of all this, Grand Marian, the angel, arrived to deliver her daily report. She explained that just the day before, a group of killer rabbits had attempted to invade the village. Fortunately, the wolves had been there to stop them. To her, this was a positive outcome since it meant they now had plenty of rabbit meat to use in their meals. Listening to her, Hiraku couldn't help noticing something. The angels were always disciplined and professional when carrying out their duties, but the moment their work ended and they were left to their own time, they slipped straight into full-on laziness. They were terrible with everyday chores, but they more than made up for it by keeping the village safe from outside threats. Later in the afternoon, after Hiraku wrapped up his chores, lunchtime rolled around. Anne and the other maids served the meals they had prepared, but this time Hiraku noticed something interesting. For many in this world, eating 2 meals a day, breakfast and lunch, felt unusual. Most of them were used to eating just 1 meal. For the elves especially, it was shocking. Many of them feared that Hiraku's insistence on frequent meals would deplete the food reserves too quickly. Once lunch was done, Hiraku got back to work. This time, he decided to try something new, planting tulips. Until now, his focus had been strictly on growing crops for survival, but he wanted to bring more beauty to the village as well. Beyond that, Hiraku also started organizing regular combat training sessions for the younger villagers, even though he doubted they'd ever need it. Considering how well protected the village was, he thought it would be better for them to be prepared. When dinner time came, the maids proudly unveiled a brand new dish they had tried making. Hiraku tasted it and found it absolutely disgusting, but not wanting to crush their spirits, he forced a smile and gave them a thumbs up of approval. Dinner gatherings had now grown into such large events that they also doubled as opportunities for villagers to make announcements or reports. That evening, Florum approached Hiraku with some news. She explained that Yuri had sent a letter. In it, Yuri requested more of the village's apples as well as clothing made from the soft cloth Zabuton wove. Florum added that she intended to tell Yuri to stop making so many selfish demands, but Hiraku shook his head, saying it was fine. He was sure Zabuton wouldn't mind making some clothes for her. Meanwhile, the dwarves continued working on their alcohol production. They informed Hiraku that in order to improve the quality of their brew, Lu. They'd need 3 times as many grapes as they were currently producing. Hiraku went to scout the fields, trying to figure out how he could possibly increase production. That's when Sina came running up to him with urgent news that a strange man had suddenly appeared in the village. Hiraku rushed to the scene and was shocked to see the man bowing before the statues he had made of the gods. What surprised him most was how this stranger had managed to enter the village without any of the security forces noticing. Lu then stepped closer, and upon seeing the man's face, she froze in recognition. She revealed that the man was none other than Vargreif, the progenitor of the vampires. Vargreif turned around, greeted Lu warmly, and then was escorted by Hiraku to the guest house. Once seated, Vargreif explained the reason for his sudden visit. He had heard rumors that Lu was pregnant and simply had to see it for himself. At first, he hadn't believed she was the type to settle down with a human and have a child, but now that he saw her here, he realized he had been mistaken. Curious, Hiraku asked Lu what Vargreif had meant when he called himself a progenitor. Lu explained that it was like being a grandfather figure to all vampires. Vargreif himself added that he was over 4,000 years old, and the key to his long life was his unusual practice of erasing parts of his own memory from time to time. He would keep only the essential details like his name and traits, while erasing everything else, freeing up more space in his mind. Hiraku found the idea terrifying, but Vargreif assured him that although it was scary at first, eventually you grew used to it. Vargreif then apologized for arriving unannounced. He explained that he had felt the presence of something divine emanating from the village, and before he knew it, he was bowing before the statues. He admitted he had only ever seen God once, but since he had erased much of his memory, he no longer remembered what he looked like. Still, when he gazed at Hiraku's statue, he was certain that was it. At that point, Hiraku understood what Vargreif wanted. The progenitor desired the statue, but Hiraku refused. He couldn't just give away what belonged to the entire village. Vargreif was visibly devastated, until Hiraku quickly added that he could always make a new one for him. Delighted, Vargreif accepted. By the end of the day, Hiraku had finished crafting a statue and gifted it to him. When Vargreif asked how much he owed for it, Hiraku refused payment. Accepting money, he explained, would make it seem as though he were putting a price on God himself. Instead, he told Vargreif to simply take it as a gift. Grateful, Vargreif returned home with the statue. Back at his palace, Vargreif was greeted by his servants. He ordered them to discard the old god statue and replace it with the new one. When it was unveiled, the servant marveled at its craftsmanship, declaring it a pure work of art. He suggested the creator's name should be spread and honored, but Vargreif shook his head, saying the man who had made it wasn't interested in fame and preferred to live a quiet, peaceful life. Instead, he ordered that Hiraku and his village be quietly rewarded. Every vampire would be instructed to show them respect. As a final gesture of celebration, Vargreif also sent the village a piano as a gift, saying it was his way of honoring Lu's pregnancy. The moment it arrived, everyone was thrilled, eager to try playing the beautiful new instrument. After that time, life in the village continued moving smoothly, and there were no complaints or troubles at all. Everyone was still doing their very best to look after Lu now that she was pregnant, even though Lu herself kept reassuring them not to worry. She trusted that she would be just fine and wanted everyone to relax. Still, the one thing that bothered her was the fact that she could no longer drink alcohol. Because of that, the villagers gathered before Hiraku and suggested that they sell off all the alcohol in the village at once. They felt that if Lu saw them drinking while she herself was unable to, it would feel like torture for her. However, Hiraku told them they might be overreacting and could regret selling everything later. Instead, he suggested that if they wanted to stop Lu from feeling tempted, they should simply store all the alcohol in barrels underground until she could drink again. Everyone agreed this was a smarter idea. Later that same day, out at the farm, Donovan and the other dwarves were a little upset. They noticed that the villagers had stopped drinking alcohol and wondered if maybe they had done something wrong in making it, or if people no longer liked the taste. Hiraku quickly explained to them that it was nothing like that. The reason no one was drinking was simply because Lu could not, and everyone was supporting her by staying away from alcohol as well. The dwarves understood and were touched by the gesture, saying that this only motivated them to work even harder for the village. The very next day, while Lu stayed resting in her room, everyone in the village came by one to give her gifts. They brought everything from food to baby clothes that could be used after the child was born. By the end of the day, Lu was lying in bed, but she began to feel a little uncomfortable uncomfortable. That was when she suddenly realized her water had broken. As soon as they heard this, everyone in the house rushed around preparing hot water and towels so the delivery process could begin. Hiraku, however, could not bear to watch, so he left and spent the entire night sleeping outside in the tree hole he had first made when he originally came to this world. The next morning, when Hiraku went back into the house, he saw Lu holding their newborn son. Filled with emotion, he walked over and held the baby himself for the first time. Later, the two decided to name him Alfred, with the choice of name being entirely Lu's idea. A week passed after Alfred's birth, and Hiraku found himself reflecting on how far the village had come. When he had first arrived in this world, he had been lonely and uncertain, but now he had friends, family, and an entire community around him. The village had only continued to grow, and he felt deeply grateful to the gods for everything that had happened. Realizing this, Hiraku decided he needed to do something to thank everyone for their hard work. So the next day, he called a village meeting and announced that he had created a new system. He pulled out a small silver coin and explained that this would now be the official currency of their village, used for trading goods and other needs. Hiraku had even taken the time to make each coin by hand so that counterfeits could not exist. Everyone found this to be an exciting idea and quickly got used to it. Some people began trading coins for things like furniture, clothing, and weapons, while others decided to save theirs instead. Before long, the villagers were comfortable using the coins. However, Hiraku soon realized that it was still difficult to decide exactly how much a coin should be worth. At one point, one of the little beast girls came to him asking if she could buy a baby in exchange for a coin. Seeing this, Hiraku realized that he would have to set some clear rules about what could and could not be purchased with money. But instead of turning her away, he simply made the beast girl the mayor for a day in exchange for her coin, much to everyone's amusement. Not long after that, the village held a great feast to celebrate the birth of Alfred. Everyone gathered together to eat, drink, and celebrate joyfully. As Hiraku looked at the giant barrel of wine that had been brought out, he laughed and said he could not wait for the day when he would be able to drink wine together with his son, Lu. However, teased him by saying that the day he was waiting for might come a lot sooner than he thought. Meanwhile, news of Alfred's birth reached the Demon Kingdom. The four generals there had already realized that it was impossible for them to challenge the strength of the Great Tree Village. Because of that, they began to think the only way to maintain a steady relationship with them would be to marry off someone from the Demon Kingdom into the village. The Demon King himself, however, immediately saw where this discussion was heading, and he shouted in outrage that there was no way he was going to let Yuri be married off into that village. The next day, Hiraku woke up feeling slightly hungover. That was when the village girls came to him and said they had something very important to tell him. When they went inside to talk, they explained that a group of people living in the nearby forest had come forward, saying they wanted to move into the village. These people had been driven out of their own homes because of war, and their numbers were around 100. Hearing this, Hiraku realized that if they were really going to accept that many people, they would need to build an entirely new village. Lu then suggested that the new place could be called Great Tree Village too. Hiraku thought this would be a huge amount of work, but the others did not mind at all. They answered with enthusiasm, saying that they were willing to try their very best. And so, everyone began making plans on how the new village would be built. It does not take long for construction to get underway, and everyone in the village is given a role to play, which fills the whole place with activity as they all work toward building the new village. By lunchtime, Anne brings out sandwiches for Hiraku and the girls, but she lets him know that they were made with ingredients that go bad quickly, so she advises that they start putting more effort into building up their supply of preserved foods. Hiraku hears that and figures that explains why there are so many vegetables lying around. Tia then speaks up and suggests they bring some of the sandwiches over to the girls working at the village hall. Hiraku thinks that is a great idea and says he will take them over himself, since Florum did mention that things were busy over there. Meanwhile, the village clerks Clacase, Roju, and Rosalind all have their heads flat on their desks, completely drained after hours of working through mountains of dull paperwork. That is when Hiraku walks in carrying a basket and tells them he brought lunch for everyone. Over with Lasti, Flora, and Hakurin, the three of them are still finding their footing in their new roles as clerks, and it is clear it is going to take some time before they have a handle on things. Lasti sneezes just a little and accidentally burns through a document, which sends them both into a panic. The head clerks look over to Hiraku for help, but he just tells them to just calm down because Florum is already on her way with some extra hands. Florum then walks in with a group of girls sent over from the demonic kingdom to help out. Most of them volunteered mainly because they wanted to support Florum. They knew it would do good things for their social standing, and they had heard the work was supposed to be easy. But after getting a good look at the environment they find themselves in, they are starting to have second thoughts about that. Either way, Florum puts them straight to work and tells them they can start by sorting the records out into categories. Hiraku sees that Florum has everything well in hand here, so he simply tells her to make sure everyone gets some sandwiches once things have calmed down a bit. Hiraku gets back and starts on some farming work, but that is when Granmaria flies down and gives him a report saying she surveyed the surrounding area and found no signs of any danger. Lee then walks up to Hiraku and lets him know that she was the one who sent Granmaria out to scout for a suitable location to set up their new village. Hiraku initially thinks the spot Lee has in mind is going to be too far out, so he suggests they pack some food for the journey. But Lee tells him the location she has been looking at is not that far away at all. It is just going to be a bit further downstream, and she chose that positioning so they would have the upper hand in the event that a rebellion ever broke out among the village members. Hiraku doubts that is ever going to happen, but Lee tells him it is always better to be ready for every possible situation. She then shows him the standout tree the area has to offer. While it is not quite as large as the one they currently have, she thinks it will do the job well enough. With the location settled, they begin making preparations to clear the trees from the area since it is Daga's field. He grabs his axe and steps up to chop down the first tree, but it turns out to be far stronger than he expected, and he cannot even get a deep cut into it. With that, Hiraku brings out the almighty farming tool and cuts through the trees with ease. After that, they set up a wooden bridge across the river, but Hiraku thinks they probably should have built something a lot sturdier. Lee reminds him, though, that if they put up something too large, the bigger monsters from the forest would start using it as well, and Hiraku sees the sense in that. They then get to work building irrigation channels, and before long, they have a full reservoir built and ready to go. After that, Hiraku speaks with Daga and tells him they are not going to be able to get enough done without a bigger supply of lumber. But Daga just tells him to take a rest for now because he and the others will handle the construction from here. With a lot of free time suddenly on his hands, Hiraku decides to spend it making a statue in honor of Zabuton. That is when Lucy walks up to him with baby Alfred in her arms and tells him that he works far too much. After that, they officially kick off construction on the houses. Hiraku thinks back to when he first arrived in this world and how difficult building even a single house was back then since he did not even have nails to work with. But now, with this much manpower available, and even some people who can use magic, they finish the first section of houses in no time at all, and Hiraku feels like everything is really starting to come together. But just then, Granmaria suddenly flies down and tells Hiraku that she just received a message from Drime saying that she wants to bring new residents to the village right now, which catches both Hiraku and Lee completely off guard. Drime then arrives and asks them to forgive the short notice, explaining that the situation at hand is very urgent. He then introduces Hiraku to a group of minotaurs that he is hoping can move into their village. Hiraku takes a look at them and is surprised because he had always pictured minotaurs as having the faces of cows, but they look almost entirely human aside from the horns on their heads. The leader of the minotaurs, Gordon, walks over to Hiraku and introduces himself, and after talking for a little while, Hiraku realizes just how enormous the height difference between them is, as Gordon is incredibly tall. Gordon explains that they were driven out of their village and spent a long time wandering with nowhere to go until they finally found someone who could help. Drime heard about their situation and felt it was urgent enough to bring to Hiraku straight away. Hiraku decides there is no need to spend too much time on small talk and asks Anne to get some food ready for them. Anne is not sure what minotaurs can and cannot eat, so she plays it safe and serves them rice pudding since that seems like a reasonable option. That is when Narf, one of the lizardmen, walks over and mentions that he has spent time around minotaurs before, so he will know the right questions to ask and what they are going to need. Hiraku gives him the go-ahead, and Narf gets straight to work finding out what the group requires. With that sorted, Hiraku figures things should run smoothly from here since everything seems to be under control. But that is when they notice that the houses they prepared for the minotaurs are simply too small for them to live in comfortably, so they start putting putting their heads together to figure out what to do about that. Just then, Florum comes rushing in and tells Hiraku that she just received word from her father saying that the new residents are going to be arriving at the village very shortly. Bezel shows up not long after and looks completely drained. Florum asks him why he did not bring the war refugees along with him, and he explains that things took a rough turn and he was forced to use quick teleportation to move a massive number of people to safety all at once, and that the effort has taken a serious toll on him. Hiraku understands completely and just tells him to go and get some rest in the meantime since he must be absolutely exhausted. Taking everything into account, Hiraku assumes that the group of half-horse centaurs must be the new residents they were expecting. The leader of the centaurs, Gruwold, steps forward and introduces herself as the king to Viscount Beeg's chief retainer. Hiraku honestly has no idea who that is, so he steps back and leaves it to Latiasai, one of the clerks, to handle the situation. Gruwold immediately starts acting high and mighty because of her noble connections, so Latiasai gives her a quick reality check and reminds her that they are the ones who came to their village, which means she does not get to start throwing her weight around and making claims on the land. Gruwold takes offense to that right away and raises her voice at Latiasai, so Latiasai calmly introduces herself as the daughter of Count Drawa. The moment Gruwold realizes that Latiasai outranks her in terms of noble standing, she immediately drops to her knees and starts begging for forgiveness. Latiasai then asks Hiraku if she can be assigned to assist the centaurs since they do have ties to her family after all, and Hiraku has absolutely no problem with that. However, he takes a moment to ask Latiasai if everything is alright back at home, since he knows they are in the middle of a war serious enough to be creating refugees. She appreciates his concern, but tells him there is really nothing to worry about. After that, they get to work trying to find suitable housing for the centaurs, but that is when they come to realize that the small houses they built are just as much of a mismatch for the centaurs as they were for the minotaurs. They would technically be able to fit inside, but it would without a doubt be very cramped. Lucy asks Gruwold if she is able to make herself smaller using magic, but Gruwold tells her that this is as small as she can get. While Hiraku is still trying to work out a solution to that problem, he does not get a moment to breathe as another group of young women shows up at their gate. Hakurin explains that she found them wandering around the forest and figured it would be a good idea to bring them over. Hiraku does not have a problem with that, but what strikes him as strange is the fact that they are carrying what appears to be a tree stump. That aside, Hiraku goes over to greet the girls, but they do not respond. Lasty and Hakurin figure they are probably just shy, but that is when the tree stump suddenly speaks up and introduces itself as Eek. Hiraku comes to find out that these girls belong to a species known as the Nunu Daphne, who have the ability to transform themselves into plants and take on the form of trees when they come across monsters. However, when they take damage while in tree form, they lose the ability to change back into humans for a period of time. Eeg explains that their lands were hit with floods after humans cut down all the trees in the area. They then made their way through the forest of death after a merchant named Michael told them about his village. Hiraku figures that makes sense and that Michael probably was not able to tell them much more since they ended up traveling the rest of the way on their own. Hiraku wants to put together a meal to welcome them properly, but Eeg tells him that they do not actually need food to survive. She takes a look at the high-quality fruit growing in his soil and concludes that the soil here must be exceptional. Hiraku then takes them over to the crop field, where Eeg explains that all they really need is clean water, plenty of sunlight, and good soil to thrive in. Hiraku takes that all in, and now that the question of food is settled, he asks them what they would like to do about housing, since they appear to be regular human-sized. Hiraku is relieved thinking that those houses they built will finally get some use, but Eeg quickly bursts that idea by telling him that they much prefer staying outdoors, which makes Hiraku immediately regret going through the trouble of building those houses ahead of time. After some thinking though, he manages to work things out. The younger minotaurs are given the regular-sized houses, the centaurs are set up in the stables, and the Nunu Daphne simply stay out in the field. Hiraku honestly finds it a little unsettling to see them just standing there through the entire night and wonders if he will ever get used to the sight of it. On top of all of that, Hiraku and the others realize they are still going to need to build proper houses for the full-sized minotaurs, and beyond that they are also going to need food, clothing, and all the other basic things people need to get by. Rather than standing sitting around thinking about it. Hiraku suggests they start with whatever they are able to manage right now, and they get to work drafting out the designs for the new homes. As a way of welcoming their 200 new residents, Hiraku and the others thought it would be a good idea to bring together representatives from each race to talk about how best to move forward. Before Hiraku gets things started, Gruwald bows before him because she has now come to fully understand just how influential and powerful Hiraku actually is. But Hiraku tells her to ease up because there is really no need for her to be that formal around him. But then Latiasai suddenly holds up a cue card for Hiraku, quietly signaling to him that he needs to carry himself with more authority in front of the citizens. Hiraku takes the advice on board and responds to Gruwald with a noticeably more commanding tone this time around. That aside, he goes on to inform her that he has assigned a dedicated representative from the village to look after each of the different races. Narf will be taking care of the Minotaurs, Latiasai will be looking after the Centaurs, and one of the beastwomen named Mamu will be taking charge of the Nunu Daphne. As it turns out, Mamu moved to the village from the Howling Village along with Sina and the others, and Hiraku ended up giving her the representative role after Sina personally put her forward and recommended her for a position of responsibility. Now, when it comes to where the Minotaurs and Centaurs are actually going to live, Hiraku explains that since all the houses they built previously were only ever designed with regular-sized people in mind, they made the decision to go ahead and build entirely separate villages that are properly sized and suited for Minotaurs and Centaurs to live in comfortably. The thinking behind it was that letting each group live among their own people would make daily life and work a whole lot easier for everyone involved. They made use of the location that Lee and the others had already scouted out and got straight to work building roads and laying down irrigation channels throughout the area. And when it came time to clear out the forest to make room, Hakurin and Lasti were able to help out with remarkable ease thanks to their enormous physical strength. However, Hiraku quickly realized that the two of them were even stronger than he had anticipated, so he had to ask them to hold back and avoid using their full power. Meanwhile, back at Hiraku's house, Anne brings Lucy some adorable little clothes for Alfred that were made by Zabuton, and although they are a little on the big side, Lucy is genuinely touched and very grateful for the gesture. At the same time, construction of the Minotaur houses is well underway, and since Minotaurs are quite tall, the decision was made to build taller single-story homes to give them enough room. But when Hiraku goes inside to have a look around, some of the furniture leaves him a little puzzled. Their bed, for example, are nothing more than flat planks of wood. But Gordon explains to him that this is actually the preferred way for them to sleep, so that their horns do not get caught on anything in the night. Over in the third village, the Centaur homes are already starting to take shape and come together nicely, since their bodies are built like horses from the waist down. Homes that are designed along the lines of stables suit them far better than anything else. Hiraku then notices that the homes do not have any doors, so Gruwald explains that this is because her kind tend to have a great deal of trouble with doors, and so they find it much more practical to use a curtain that can be drawn open and closed with a rope instead. A full month passes after that, and all of everyone's hard work finally brings both new villages to completion. Hiraku and the others are simply relieved that they managed to wrap everything up before winter set in, because there is no way they could have left the new residents out in the open with nowhere proper to stay. As for what to call the new villages, Hiraku keeps it simple and decides to just name them Village 2 and Village 3. Florum then brings up the point that they are going to need mayors to oversee each of the new villages, and she puts forward the suggestion that Gordon take on the role of mayor for Village 2, while Gruwald takes on the same role for Village 3. But Lee raises the concern that having them on the same level of rank as Hiraku would not be a great idea, so Florum suggests they work on establishing a clearer hierarchy and giving Hiraku a title that properly reflects his position above the others. They go back and forth between calling him the Great Mayor or King Major, but that is when Eeg shows up and asks when a village is going to be built for her people. Hiraku explains that they actually decided against building a dedicated village for the Nunu Daphne, which visibly saddens Eeg, but Hiraku asks her to hear him out for a moment because he has a favor he would like to ask of her people across each of the villages. Since the Nunu Daphne are naturally better suited to staying in one fixed place for long periods of time, Hiraku explains that his plan was to position them at key locations throughout the villages and have them take on the role of lookouts and information relayers. players. Since the Nunu Daphne have the ability to communicate through telepathy, Hiraku believes they would make absolutely perfect messengers for keeping everyone connected. On top of that, the Nunu Daphne were also put to use as a source of light during the nighttime hours, which turned out to be another very practical role for them to fill. Now that each race has settled into their new homes, Hiraku is eager to start assigning proper roles and responsibilities to the residents of villages 1 and 2, but many of them are still not quite used to seeing Zabuton and the Kuro wandering around, which makes things a little tricky. Just then, Narf and Latiasai come over to let Hiraku know that they have run into a problem. Hiraku finds out that both the centaurs and the minotaurs are simply not cut out for hunting at all, which genuinely surprises him because looking at them you would assume they were incredibly capable. Hiraku never stopped to think about how difficult hunting actually was before, mostly because he always left that side of things entirely to the Inferno Wolves. With that in mind, Tia suggests they keep the residents away from the woods altogether and focus on placing more defenders in both villages instead. Hiraku figures the Nunu Daphne would also need guards watching over them, but Mamu informs him that they are actually a great deal stronger than anyone gave them credit for and are more than capable of handling monsters that wander into the village, mostly by catching them off guard through ambush. Even with that said, Hiraku makes the call to leave all hunting duties to Kuro and the other Inferno Wolves, while the residents focus their energy on tilling the fields across each of the villages. However, their efforts do not go as planned, as the seeds they plant simply fail to germinate, and Hiraku immediately understands exactly why that is. Up until now, the only reason they were ever able to grow and bring in a full harvest regardless of the season was because of the almighty farming tool, whose divine power had the ability to make any soil fertile and productive. The problem is that he is the only one who can use it, which means the new villages are going to have to find a way to work their fields without having access to it at all. Hiraku and Sina put their heads together trying to figure out a way to get the crops to grow properly, but that is when Gordon steps up with an idea of his own. He suggests laying down straw across the fields to keep the soil from getting too cold, which might give them a much better chance of getting things to grow. With winter already on its way, he also recommends that the best crop to be planting right now would be wheat. Hiraku is genuinely impressed that Gordon knows all of this, and Gordon explains that it comes from the time he spent working the fields back in his old village. With that, Gordon takes the lead and walks everyone through the process of planting the seedlings properly, and they are told that it is going to take roughly half a year before everything is fully grown and ready to be brought in. Hiraku hears that and is taken aback by just how long that actually is, and it makes him realize just how dependent he had become on the power of the almighty farming tool without even noticing. While the Minotaurs took on the responsibility of handling agriculture across the villages, the Centaurs put their natural abilities to work and carved out a whole new line of work for themselves. Their brand new Centaur delivery service got up and running and began moving goods back and forth between the villages, with the adult Centaurs being assigned to handle the regular daily deliveries. Later that day, Hiraku gets talking with Gruwold and admits that he has always wanted to ride a horse. He managed to get a horse from Michael at some point, but this particular horse never listens to a word he says, so he asks Gruwold whether she would be able to communicate with it and get it to give him a ride. But Gruwold informs him that she does not actually speak horse. However, she does offer to give him a ride on her back if he is up for it. Hiraku takes her up on that and hops on, and Gruwold carries him on a ride around the field. The horse watches the whole thing from nearby and suddenly starts to get visibly jealous about it. So a few days later, the horse lowers itself down and waits for Hiraku to climb on, and when Hiraku does, the horse takes him on a full ride around the field, which genuinely shocks Hiraku because this is completely new behavior from a horse that would never cooperate with him before. Gruwold watches from a distance and starts to feel a little jealous herself. Over time, Hiraku starts to notice that Gruwold and the horse have quietly been competing with each other to be the one he chooses to ride. So in order to keep the peace between them, Hiraku simply tells them both that he is going to take turns riding each of them every other day, and that seems to settle things down. Shortly after that, Hiraku sits down for a chat with Lucy, and Lucy tells him how happy she is to see how much progress has been made across the villages. Hiraku admits that he was a little worried about how the sudden and massive influx of new residents was going to affect everything, but he is genuinely glad to see that it all came together in the end. mind. He knows that for the time being everyone relies on him a great deal, but he cannot ignore the fact that so much of what they have built was only made possible because of the almighty farming tool. Leaning too heavily on what the almighty farming tool makes possible does worry him when he thinks about the future, especially since that reliance alone is not going to be enough to sustain things in the long run. With that on his mind, Lucy simply takes baby Alfred and places him in Hiraku's arms, telling him that he really ought to sit back and enjoy the life he has worked so hard to build for himself. Hiraku takes her advice to heart, and it is clear that his mood lifts noticeably after that. While Hiraku was spending more time than usual reflecting on things, he suddenly remembered another important concern that had been sitting in the back of his mind. The Great Tree Village is almost entirely made up of women, and by comparison there are barely any men to speak of. And this has Hiraku genuinely worried about what their future looks like, though he figures that now that they have so many more villagers overall, this might not turn out to be as big a problem as he feared. Hiraku pulls Gordon aside and lays out the whole situation to him, asking whether it would be possible for some of the Minotaur men to come over to the Great Tree Village and look for partners there. But Gordon points out that it is a deeply held custom among Minotaurs to only marry within their own kind. Hearing that, Hiraku crosses the Minotaurs off his list and turns his attention to the Centaurs as his next option. It felt a little awkward bringing something like this up with Gruwold since she is a woman, but Hiraku reminded himself that this conversation is being had for the sake of the village's future and pressed on anyway. When he raises the topic with Gruwold, he learns that most of the male centaurs are still young boys, since the adult males are away fighting in a war. That aside, Hiraku asks Gruwold whether it is possible for centaurs to marry someone from a completely different race, and Gruwold immediately announces that she is single the moment she hears the question. She mentions that it is quite rare for that sort of thing to happen, but tells him that if that is what he is after, she can absolutely make it work. She puts herself forward enthusiastically as someone who would be happy to be paired with a man from another race, and just from the way she sounds, Hiraku can easily tell that she has been single for a very long time. Winter arrives quickly, so everyone takes a break from farming and enjoys the festive season. They eat from the food stock they stored earlier in the year, but now that more villages have joined them, there are a lot more people to feed, and Hiraku starts to worry if they have enough. Then Latiasai and Narf come to him with some news. The new villagers are eating way less than expected. If things keep going this way, they'll actually end up with leftover food going to waste. Hiraku had already told everyone not to ration, since there was plenty, but even so, people were still holding back. Hiraku thinks for a moment, then suggests they just tell everyone to eat the meat and vegetables before they spoil. Latiasai and Narf both agree, as it sounds like a good idea. But then Hiraku notices Mamu looking gloomy. He figures the new Daphne must need something, but Mamu corrects him. The problem is the opposite. They never need anything. They never need any food or extra care, and it's really starting to tick her off because she was excited to be put in charge of them, but she hasn't actually had anything to do yet. Then Narf speaks up, saying there is one thing. The Minotaurs have passed along a request from the new Daphne. They'd like everyone to wear clothes when outside. Mamu's ears perk up. She admits that sometimes they forget to go out fully dressed. She promises to remind them to keep their clothes on at all times. Later that afternoon, Hiraku decides to make machai using a mortar and pestle. When the girls hear about it, they're surprised since they've never seen or heard of that method before. Hiraku starts pounding the machai. The girls watch and slowly look a little let down. They were expecting something a lot more exciting, though the girls understand that all they need to do is pound it, so they all want to try. They take turns but end up going overboard and using too much of their strength. Still, after all that, they manage to make a good batch in the end. The sauce and flavoring were already prepared, so everyone digs in and it tastes great. Lee brings Hiraku some kusamachi she made herself using fragrant herbs mixed into the machai. Hiraku tastes it and tells her it's delicious. Then Donovan shows up with some sake to liven things up. He heard they were working with rice, so he figured it was a good time to bring it over. Everyone's attention immediately shifts to him. Machai making ends up catching on as a fun winter activity whenever the weather is good enough to go outside. As it turns out, Gordon is the best machai maker out of all of them, though no one seems all that surprised by that. Later that same afternoon, a man in armor is seen kneeling in front of a Minotaur woman and asking her out of nowhere to be his wife. She looks at him and asks who he is. He takes off his helmet and introduces himself as Gratz, the head of the House of Britoa from the demon kingdom of Galgardo. Hearing that, she introduces herself as Renana. Hiraku watches the whole thing unfold and has no idea what is going on. That is when Bezel steps in to explain. Back in the demon kingdom, Gratz was very eager to build a relationship with the Great Tree Village, and he believed that marrying one of its members was the best way to do that. Gratz then walks over to Hiraku. When he finds out that Hiraku is the village chief, he asks for his blessing to marry Renana, since she told him he had to get Hiraku's permission first. But Hiraku points out that he has no say in who marries who. He tells Gratz that the first person he needs to ask is Renana herself, and if she agrees, then they are free to get married. Hearing that, Gratz turns to Renana and asks her. Renana just blushes. That is enough to make it clear that the deal is done. When Gratz returns to the demon kingdom, he misses Renana terribly. He also does not want another man coming along and taking her from him, so he makes a decision on the spot and resigns from his position as one of the great generals. He is going to go and be with Renana. He knows it is a rash and impulsive move, but he does not care. He is willing to do anything for love. Meanwhile, Hiraku is thinking about how to make the machai more interesting. That is when the idea of dried seaweed comes to mind. The girls have never heard of it before and have no idea what it is. But when Hiraku mentions that it grows along the seashore, they figure the best person to ask about it is Michael. A few days later, Michael arrives and thanks Hiraku for his continued business. Hiraku tells him not to worry about it. Michael then reveals a barrel of seaweed he brought along and admits that it is not something they normally eat, so he is not entirely sure it is what Hiraku had in mind. Hiraku takes one look at the barrel and says it is exactly what he needs. Hiraku gets to work processing the seaweed. He mashes it into a paste and shapes it using a molding square. When it is finished, he has made a seaweed food wrap. Michael stares at it, genuinely surprised. He had no idea seaweed could take that form. Sina asks if the seaweed wraps are meant to be eaten as they are. Hiraku tells her not yet. He holds them over a fire and explains that they need to be heated first to make them crisp, which also makes them easier to digest. After that, he wraps the machai inside and takes a bite. A wave of relief washes over him. This is the same quality of machai he remembers from his past life. The girls notice his expression, but are not convinced it could be that good. Then Hiraku hands them each a piece of the toasted machai wrapped in seaweed. They all agree it is delicious. Michael sees how well it goes over and makes a proposal. He offers to have his people harvest and process the seaweed exclusively for Hiraku. In return, he would like to trade for some of the ingredients used to make the machai. Hiraku tells him that is not something he can promise right now since they would need to grow more machai rice first, but he is willing to bring it up with his people for Michael's sake. Michael is happy to hear that, though deep down his real motivation is simply finding another way to make money. He then tries to ask about their alcohol, and everyone tells him to stay out of it. That evening, Hiraku teaches the girls how to make sushi. He is surprised by how fast they are picking it up. When it is done, and they all sit down to eat, Florum admits she was a little put off by the smell at first, but after tasting it, she says it is delicious. Hiraku mentions that the vinegar in the sushi helps keep it fresh in lunchboxes. When they ask why, he explains that vinegar kills bacteria. Winter slowly begins to wrap up after that. Even as the snow melts, there are still cold days. Most years it is hard to know when to start farming again, but going forward, everyone agrees to follow Eeg's guidance on that. That afternoon, Hiraku heads over to the clerks at the town hall and tells them he has been thinking about creating a new festival for the new villages. He throws out a few ideas, but the girls look at him blankly, not understanding why anyone would celebrate those things. The ideas are all festivals from his old life in Japan, so he gets why they do not land. The girls mention that they have their own festivals they are familiar with and start explaining them. Hiraku listens and does not understand a single thing they are describing. He decides to just leave the planning entirely to them, but he notices that the girls are arguing a lot and cannot seem to agree, so he has everyone write down their local traditions, folds them up, and puts them in a box. He draws one out himself, and it ends up being a martial arts competition. Hiraku wonders out loud how that would even work. Florum explains that it would be a competition where everyone pits their different fighting styles against each other. She actually thinks it is a brilliant idea and suggests they start planning it right away. A week later, spring arrives, and everyone in the Great Tree Village village begins training for the upcoming martial arts competition. Hiraku is surprised to see how seriously everyone is taking it and how much effort they are putting into their preparation. When Hiraku goes inside, he meets Hakurin. She tells him that she is planning to train for the martial arts competition because she has not been able to use her full strength since arriving in the village. Hiraku knows how powerful and destructive Hakurin can be, so he tries to prevent her from actually participating as a fighter. Instead, he convinces her to become one of the referees for the competition. At that moment, Lasty comes in and says she is also planning to train and participate. Hiraku immediately recognizes that Lasty is just as dangerous when it comes to power and destruction, so he quickly suggests another idea. He tells both Hakurin and Lasty that they do not need to fight as competitors and instead should act as referees. He also explains that the competition will need 2 referees anyway, and both of them are perfect for the role. Hakurin and Lasty agree to become referees, but they make it clear that they still want to fight. Because of that, Hiraku compromises by allowing them to have their own separate mock battle outside of the main competition. After that, Hiraku starts planning the construction of the tournament arena. His design includes a central fighting stage with stadium-style seating for the audience. He also adds space for shops and restaurants, so the event can feel more like a festival for the village. A few days later, the day of the martial arts competition finally arrives. The people of the Great Tree Village are filled with excitement as they gather to watch. The event becomes even more significant because it attracts special guests, including the demon lord Galgardo and his daughter, Yuri, who come to observe the competition. Hiraku meets Galgardo and immediately starts to feel nervous about how he should behave since he does not know much about demon customs. However, Yuri notices his anxiety and tells her father to relax and not be so formal. Because of that, Galgardo drops the formal attitude and greets Hiraku in a more casual way. After that, Hakurin arrives and introduces her father, Doze, who is known as the legendary dragon and is also Lasty's grandfather. Hiraku greets him politely and is relieved to find that he seems like a kind and friendly person. Soon after, the martial arts competition is prepared to begin and the entire crowd is filled with excitement. Hiraku explains the rules to everyone. The participants will draw lots to determine one-on-one matches. To win, a fighter must either knock their opponent out of the ring or achieve victory based on their headbands. The headbands are enchanted with protective magic and will unravel when a decisive hit is landed. The first match begins shortly after and is between Rosalind and Mamu. Their fight is extremely fast and difficult to follow. Hiraku watches closely and is surprised by how skilled both of them are in martial arts, realizing he underestimated their abilities. Mamu continues to attack aggressively, but eventually lets her guard down for a moment. Rosalind takes advantage of this opening and lands a decisive strike, winning the match. However, she is left in serious pain afterward and immediately requests to see a healer. The second round begins, and Donovan quickly demonstrates his strength. He absorbs all of his opponent's attacks without taking any visible damage. Afterward, he simply picks her up and places her outside the ring, winning the match with ease. The next match is between Gruwald and Roji. Gruwald is confident in her victory and charges forward with full force. However, she overextends and runs too far, accidentally stepping out of the ring. This results in Roji being declared the winner. The final and most anticipated match of the open tournament is between Florum and Sina. Florum fights using both swordsmanship and magic, while Sina fights unarmed. The battle begins with Florum launching magical attacks, but Sina manages to dodge them and counters with close-range martial arts techniques. Florum adapts quickly and responds with her own attacks. The audience watches in amazement as the fight becomes increasingly intense and aggressive. In the end, both Florum and Sina are knocked out of the ring at the same time, resulting in a tie. With that, the open tournament concludes and the winners are awarded honorary medals. However, this is only the first half of the event. The second half, the Warrior Tournament, is about to begin. Shortly after, the Warrior Tournament is officially announced. Hiraku believes this part will be more straightforward than the first, since victory will be decided by knockout or surrender, and there are no restrictions on weapons. Only those strong enough to fight under these conditions are allowed to participate. The first match of the Warrior Tournament is between Uno, one of the Infernal Wolves, and Junya the Lamia. The battle begins with Uno immediately unleashing his fire breath, but Junya easily avoids it. She then uses her full snake form to restrain him. However, Uno suddenly reveals his true form, which is so intense intimidating that Junya cannot withstand it and chooses to concede. After that, the next round is between Dogga and one of Zabuton's kids named Makura. The battle begins with Dogga swinging his attacks with full strength. However, Makura easily dodges every strike without difficulty. Taking advantage of the openings, Makura quickly traps Dogga in a web, securing the win and becoming the victor of the match. Round 3 is between Ya and Garf. The fight starts and Garf immediately displays impressive speed and coordination. Hiraku watches closely and assumes that Garf should have the advantage in this match. However, Ya uses a large hammer, which puts her at a disadvantage in terms of speed, but gives her a major advantage in raw power. She lands a heavy strike directly on Garf and sends him flying far across the ring. He nearly gets knocked out of the arena, but he manages to regain his footing just in time and stays inside the ring. Ya quickly realizes that she has used up almost all of her energy from that single attack. Understanding that she can no longer continue fighting effectively, she chooses to surrender. The next match is between Lee and Granmaria. This fight becomes one of the most entertaining matches for the audience to watch. Lee displays a surprising level of skill and manages to outsmart Granmaria during the battle, eventually locking her into an armbar. However, Granmaria responds immediately by attempting to lift Lee using only one arm. In response, Lee summons a lightning bolt that strikes both of them at the same time, sending them both to the ground. Since neither fighter is able to continue, the match ends in a draw. The battle between the rivals Lucy and Tia finally begins. The moment they clash, even Hiraku finds it difficult to follow their movements, so he quickly summons his special farming tool that allows him to observe their fight more clearly. Their battle is extremely intense, and at first it appears to be completely balanced, with neither side gaining an advantage. However, Lucy suddenly lets her guard down for a brief moment, and Tia takes the opportunity to land a decisive blow, winning the match. With Tia as the winner of that round, her next opponent becomes Makura, meaning this match serves as the final. However, the final turns out to be very one-sided. Makura easily restrains Tia using his webs and pins her down without much difficulty, becoming the winner of the warrior tournament. Hiraku then presents Makura with the crown as the prize, and the crowd cheers for him. After that, Hiraku steps forward to give the closing speech. However, before the event can fully conclude, Lasti and Hakurin call out to Hiraku, reminding him about their promised mock battle. Hiraku agrees and allows them to use the stage. The moment the two of them clash, a massive explosion erupts from the impact. The force of the collision is so strong that it can even be seen from the demonic kingdoms, and it ends up completely destroying the arena. Despite the destruction, Hakurin is declared the winner of their mock battle. In the end, Hiraku is simply relieved that everyone is safe and that the event was enjoyable for the participants and spectators. Latiasai then asks when the next tournament will be held, but after looking at the ruined arena, Hiraku replies that it will not be happening anytime soon. Harvesting season arrives shortly after that, and Sino works alongside Hiraku as they uproot a vegetable known as a daikon. Hiraku decides to give it a quick taste test and finds it to be quite delicious. Sino also takes a bite, but her reaction is completely different as she immediately notices how spicy it is. Hiraku apologizes for not mentioning it earlier and explains that a daikon is actually divided into 3 sections: sweet, normal, and spicy, and she just happened to bite into the spicy portion. Since Hiraku assumes most people would not be fond of the spicy sections, he suggests that they could repurpose those parts into other foods such as pickles or dried daikon. He explains that dried daikon is simple to make, as it only requires cutting the vegetable into pieces and leaving it out to dry over time. Just then, the beast children suddenly arrive and inform Hiraku that there are some unusual visitors waiting outside. Hiraku steps out to check and quickly realizes that one of them is his old buddy Valgrife, who has arrived along with an unfamiliar woman. Hiraku welcomes them inside, and Valgrife is immediately surprised when he sees how much Alfred has grown since the last time they met. After exchanging greetings, Hiraku assumes that the woman accompanying Valgrife is his wife. However, the woman quickly corrects him, saying that while she might wish that were the case, she is actually a Korin priestess. Hiraku admits that he has never heard of the Korin religion before, so Valgrife explains that it is essentially a broad system that combines various gods and religions worshipped across different lands. He further adds that their teachings emphasize that every individual is free to worship whichever gods they choose. Hiraku listens to the explanation and acknowledges that it is a very open-minded and inclusive belief system. She introduces herself as Fushu, and it quickly becomes clear just how important she is, because apparently entire parades are held in her honor whenever she's around. Hearing that, Hiraku feels that they shouldn't be speaking to her so casually, but Fushu immediately tells him not to worry about formalities, because she does not care much for that kind of treatment. Setting that aside, she explains the real reason she came. She has a request for Hiraku and begs him to save her son's life. Her son is extremely ill, and she believes that the people in Hiraku's village are her last hope. She mentions that this is the home of Lucy, the vampire princess, and Flora, who is known for her deep knowledge on medicinal herbs. When Flora hears the situation, she responds with confidence and tells Fushu to simply explain the symptoms so she can begin working on a cure immediately. However, after hearing the details, she realizes the situation is far more complicated than expected. Fushu's son is so unlucky that he's suffering from a combination of several extremely rare illnesses, making treatment incredibly difficult. Fushu and Valgrife are not surprised by this, as every doctor they have consulted has told them the same thing. Even so, Lucy refuses to turn them away and assures them that they will find a solution somehow. With that decision made, Flora and Lucy begin experimenting to create a cure. They quickly realize they will need a wide range of rare ingredients, so the various species in the village are mobilized to gather them. One of the rarest ingredients required is a dragon's tear. To obtain it, they simply tickle Lasti until she starts crying, allowing them to collect the tear. Not long after, all the necessary ingredients are gathered. The final step involves carefully extracting a rare plant from a pot. Lucy and Flora both understand how valuable it is, so they proceed with extreme caution. Flora pulls it out in one swift motion. At first, everything seems fine, but then the plant suddenly releases an overwhelmingly foul odor strong enough to drive away beasts. After dealing with that, Hiraku heads off to take a bath. Although gathering the ingredients was difficult, the real challenge begins as Flora and Lucy continue their experiments for several days. Throughout this time, Fushu remains in constant prayer, hoping for a miracle. Even late at night, when Hiraku suggests she come inside to rest, she refuses, saying that praying is the only thing she can focus on right now. After several more days, filled with repeated trial and error and even explosions from failed experiments, they finally succeed in creating the cure. The completed medicine is handed over to Fushu. She expresses deep gratitude, but the others tell her not to worry about repayment and instead urge her to make sure her son takes the medicine as soon as possible so he can recover. Fushu promises that she will repay their kindness someday. With that, she and Valgrife open a portal and depart immediately, taking the cure back to her son. After Fushu and Valgrife leave, everyone notices something unusual. Fushu's constant prayers cause the statue to emit a blinding glow, and that light lasted throughout the entire night. The glow ends up keeping Zabuton and his family up at night. Seeing how disturbing it is for them, Hiraku decides that the doors to the statue should remain closed unless it is time for prayers. The next day, while the beast children are out gathering fruits and veggies, they come across a strange-looking tree they have never seen before. When Hiraku arrives, he quickly realizes that it is actually a result of his earlier experiments from when he first came to this world. Back then, he used the almighty farming tool to create all sorts of plants, including ones that did not originally exist. When the girls ask him what the tree is supposed to grow, he admits that he honestly has no idea. Florum suggests that from now on, they should properly document everything they grow in the village. With so many experimental crops around, there is no telling what might end up mixed together. Hiraku agrees with that idea, and they begin examining the fruits on the tree. At first, they are confused because the fruits are too large to be plums and too hard to be kiwis. Sina then picks up some fallen fruits from the ground, and Hiraku immediately recognizes them as walnuts. He explains that walnuts have very hard shells and usually require a nutcracker to open, but the girls do not seem to struggle at all and easily break them apart. As they continue exploring the area, Florum carefully documents each plant and its fruit. They soon identify walnuts, almonds, and peanuts growing nearby. Seeing all of this triggers a memory for Hiraku. When he first arrived in this world, he had really wanted a stockpile of mixed nuts. and it seems that desire somehow influenced what he created with the farming tool. From that, he assumes that the entire field is likely filled with various nut crops. However, that still leaves one mystery: the large tree they found earlier. The fruit on that tree looks similar to chili peppers, but it is clearly something different. They crack one open, and Hiraku realizes that they are actually cashews, though he had never seen their shells look quite like that before. After roasting them, they prepare a bowl of mixed nuts, and everyone agrees that it tastes surprisingly good. Florum adds that these nuts would sell extremely well in the demonic kingdom, and Hiraku immediately agrees, pointing out that one of their biggest advantages is how long they can be stored without going bad. Because of that, he realizes that this could become a very reliable trade product for the village. With that in mind, he decides that it would be a good idea to start expanding their production and growing even more of these nut crops moving forward. After a little while, Hiraku's mind begins to wander, and he starts recalling how the wine slime originally came into existence. Back when the village was still developing, there was a slime that lived near their water source and helped purify the stream. One day, by complete accident, that slime fell into a barrel of alcohol. Instead of dissolving or dying, it underwent a strange transformation and became what they now know as the wine slime. Ever since that day, the slime has had a habit of showing up during events and gatherings, always trying to get more alcohol to drink. Even now, despite how often they see it, no one in the village truly understands much about it or how it actually functions. The following day, Hiraku is outside working together with Tia as they attempt to build a parachute. The process appears to be going smoothly, and the design is coming together well. While they are working, Hakurin and Lasty come over and ask what exactly they are making, since they have never seen anything like it before. Hiraku explains that a parachute is a device meant to slow someone's fall if they ever end up dropping from the sky during flight. However, Hakurin and Lasty do not really see the point of such an invention, especially since they themselves can simply land safely without needing anything like that. Hiraku reminds them that not everyone has their level of physical ability, so something like this could still be useful for others. Tia then finishes testing the parachute and points out that while it does function properly, she doubts it would be able to support much weight. Hiraku considers her feedback and thinks about making it slightly larger to improve its capacity, but at the same time, he does not want it to become too bulky or inconvenient to use. Right at that moment, the wine slime suddenly appears and expresses interest in trying out the parachute for itself. Without any hesitation, Tia places the slime into the parachute and tosses it up into the air. As they watch it descend, Hiraku notices how stable and comfortable the wine slime looks while floating down, and he concludes that it might actually be perfect to use as a test subject for future experiments with the parachute. Meanwhile, over at the elf workshop, Hideto, who serves as Ya's assistant, approaches her to go over their production plans one final time. Even though they were only instructed to create a standard bowl, Ya instead proudly presents a massive bowl that is large enough to hold food for everyone in the village at once. However, the moment she finishes showing it off, the bowl collapses and crumbles apart due to being poorly constructed. It is then revealed that Hideto and Ya have known each other since they were very young. Although Ya naturally had the qualities to become a leader, Hideto always preferred to remain in the background and support her as an assistant. Over time, after going through many hardships together, their people eventually made their way to the Great Tree Village. Now that they are living there, they are able to enjoy many comforts and luxuries that they never had access to before, and Hideto feels deeply grateful for that change in their lives. Because of this, she believes it is important to think carefully about how they can continue maintaining these luxuries in the future. However, Ya does not seem particularly concerned with such long-term considerations. Even so, Ya acknowledges that their relationship with Hiraku is extremely important. From her perspective, Hiraku treats everyone in the village equally and does not show favoritism toward anyone, but she still believes that being in his good graces will benefit them in the long run. She also believes that her strength is something that could help her stand out. In fact, she went as far as training in the Stormy Mountains for several days just to become strong enough to gain Hiraku's attention. Hideto quickly stops her and explains that brute strength is not the way to win Hiraku over. Ya becomes confused by this because she has always been taught that showing off strength is the best way for a woman to attract a man's attention. Hideto clarifies that while that might apply in combat situations, it does not really work in this kind of context. Still not convinced, Ya decides that the only way way to prove her point is through direct action. She goes to Hiraku and demonstrates her incredible physical strength right in front of him. However, instead of being impressed, Hiraku ends up feeling more intimidated than anything else. Realizing that this approach failed, Hirato brings you back to the workshop and explains once again that earning Hiraku's favor will require a completely different strategy. She suggests that they start thinking about other ways to appeal to him rather than relying solely on strength. Despite all of this, Ye still does not fully accept Hirato's reasoning. After thinking it over, she concludes that the problem was not her strength itself, but rather that she only showed the strength of her arms. So to fix that, she decides that next time she will demonstrate the strength of her abs instead, believing that will surely leave a stronger impression on Hiraku. The next day, Hiraku is surprised when he wakes up and sees that several winged people along with a number of angels have all been completely tied up and trapped inside Zabuton's giant spider webs. None of them are able to move properly, and they all look really pissed off. Not long afterward, Granmaria flies down to meet Hiraku. The moment she arrives, Hiraku immediately asks whether she knows the angels that were captured in the webs. Granmaria explains that after the new villages were established, the territory they needed to manage became much larger than before. Because of that, they needed additional aerial support to properly watch over the area. So Granmaria traveled to several other angel settlements in order to request help from her people. However, instead of receiving peaceful support, the daughter of one of the angel leaders gathered a force together and came to attack their village instead. Granmaria then introduces the girl as Kyabit. The moment Kyabit hears herself being introduced, she immediately begins loudly demanding that Hiraku release them from the spider webs. She angrily complains that trapping her like this is no way to treat a princess of the angels. Hiraku calmly responds by telling her to pipe down, because if she had simply approached the village like an ordinary visitor instead of attacking, then none of this would have happened in the first place. Kyabit quickly explains that neither she nor her forces actually intended to harm anyone. According to her, they only came to uphold the pride and honor of their race because she believes Granmaria abandoned her people and is now living a disgraceful and immoral life inside the Great Tree Village. Hiraku becomes completely confused after hearing that and admits he has no idea what she is talking about. Kyabit then explains further by revealing that Granmaria never completed the traditional trial that members of their race must perform in order to officially claim a husband. Hearing that only leaves Hiraku even more confused than before. So he immediately calls Granmaria for a sidebar and asks her to properly explain exactly what is going on. Granmaria then explains that her race mostly consists of women, so in order to continue their bloodline and preserve their people, they usually need to bring men from other races back as husbands. However, they cannot simply accept just any man they meet. According to their traditions, the man chosen must first be brought before their people and forced to go through a series of difficult trials in order to prove that he is worthy enough to become a husband for one of their race. Granmaria believes Kyabit is especially angry because both she and Tia have been living together with men in the village without ever properly completing the traditional angel trials first. Hiraku thinks they should simply explain the situation calmly, but Granmaria doubts that approach will work because Kyabit is extremely stubborn and rarely changes her mind once she decides something. A short while later, Hiraku releases all the captured angels and harpies from Zabuton's webs, but he intentionally leaves Kyabit hanging there by herself. After that, he calmly announces that he is officially treating what happened as an attack against his village, because they attacked his home and were captured afterward. He explains that he technically has the right to do whatever he wants with them. However, Hiraku also says that he is willing to forgive all of them under one condition. If they agree to work under Granmaria from now on, then he will overlook the attack completely. Without even hesitating, the harpies immediately agree and pledge their loyalty to Granmaria on the spot. The angels, however, hesitate much more. They do not want to betray Kyabit because she is expected to become their future leader someday. If they turn against her now, they believe it could ruin their future within angel society entirely. The harpies, on the other hand, honestly do not care very much because they are already used to serving angels, no matter who ends up leading them. After hearing all this, Hiraku realizes that the angels simply need a proper excuse to surrender without facing repercussions in the future. So he announces that attacking the village is considered a very serious crime, and because of that, Kyabit will have to endure 10 punishments. However, he He also adds another condition. For every angel who sincerely begs for forgiveness, one punishment will be removed from Kyabit's sentence. The moment the angels hear that, they immediately bow their heads and apologize because they are willing to do absolutely anything to protect Kyabit. Now that they have officially surrendered, both the angels and harpies are welcomed into the village peacefully. Even after all of that, Kyabit still stubbornly refuses to personally surrender. Because of this, Grandmaria asks Hiraku whether he would be willing to participate in the traditional angel husband trials just for the sake of shutting Kyabit up. Hearing that makes Kyabit start rambling again because she does not believe someone as puny looking as Hiraku would ever be capable of passing the trials. Surprisingly, Hiraku calmly agrees to take part in them, though he does say he hopes the tests do not involve fighting dangerous monsters. Grandmaria tells him he is actually not too far off, but she still believes he will succeed anyway. Shortly afterward, the three of them sit down together inside the house, and Hiraku asks Kyabit to properly explain what the trials involve. Kyabit confidently explains that the trials consist of 5 different parts. The first challenge is a test of wealth. For this trial, Hiraku must donate 777 gold coins to the angels. Kyabit smugly laughs because she assumes a small village like this could never possibly afford that amount of money. However, the moment Hiraku casually pulls out a Galgo stone worth over 1,000 gold coins, Kyabit immediately freezes in shock. She quickly accepts the stone, which officially clears the first trial. The second challenge is a test of intelligence. Kyabit lays out a row of stones on a grid and explains the rules of the game. They will take turns removing stones, and whoever takes the very last stone loses the match. During each turn, a player may remove anywhere between 1 and 3 stones. Kyabit feels extremely confident because she assumes Hiraku is too dumb to beat her in a strategy game like this. However, Hiraku unexpectedly wins the first round with ease. Kyabit becomes frustrated and repeatedly demands rematches over and over again, but no matter how many times they play, Hiraku completely dominates every single match without difficulty. The next challenge is a test of physical prowess. For this round, Kyabit is allowed to choose anyone she wants for Hiraku to compete against. Without hesitation, she chooses Lucy, the devastating vampire princess, because she assumes there is no way Hiraku could possibly beat someone as powerful as her. However, Kyabit has absolutely no idea that Lucy is already Hiraku's loving wife. Because of that, the entire challenge ends in a very unexpected way. Instead of having a brutal fight, Hiraku casually beats Lucy in a simple game of shadow boxing, which officially clears the third trial. The fourth challenge is a test of negotiation skills. For this trial, Hiraku is supposed to successfully negotiate and strike a deal with the supposedly impossible gatekeeper dragon who rules over the Guru Grant Mountains. Kyabit confidently assumes there is no way Hiraku could ever complete a task like that. However, shortly afterward, the dragon suddenly arrives at the village, and to Kyabit's complete disbelief, it turns out he is already one of Hiraku's dealers. Seeing that leaves Kyabit completely speechless because the challenge ends before it even properly begins. The fifth and final challenge is a test of luck. According to Kyabit, all Hiraku has to do to pass is flip a coin and have it land on heads. Hiraku flips the coin, and it really does land on heads. However, Kyabit secretly cheats at the last second and quickly flips the coin over to tails, causing Hiraku to technically lose the challenge. Just then, Tia suddenly arrives and immediately uses her magic to flip the coin back onto heads again. Kyabit tries arguing that using magic like that goes against the rules, but she knows better than to argue directly with Tia, so she quickly gives up complaining. After all the trials are finally over, Hiraku speaks privately with Tia about Kyabit's strange behavior. Tia explains that Kyabit's mother once lowered the difficulty of the husband trials in order to marry a man who was considered beneath her social status. Ever since then, many people among the angels have continued talking badly about her mother behind her back. Hearing that helps Hiraku finally understand why Kyabit was being so stubborn and defensive about the trials from the very beginning. Not long afterward, Kyabit walks over to Hiraku and sincerely apologizes for how aggressive and defensive she acted earlier. Hiraku was never the kind of person to hold grudges against others, so he calmly accepts her apology and officially welcomes her into the village. For the time being, both the angels and the harpies decide to stay in Village 1 together. Surprisingly, Kyabit actually turns out to be fairly calm and reasonable under normal circumstances, although she still gets overly excited from time to time after drinking alcohol, things generally remain peaceful. The Harpies soon begin helping the village with aerial support duties, and Granmaria along with the others become extremely happy about having their assistance. The very next day, Hiraku suddenly notices a giant dragon flying through the sky above the village. At first, he assumes the dragon is preparing to attack them. However, the dragon suddenly transforms into a human and begs Hiraku if to let him crash at his village. Hiraku welcomes him without hesitation, and the newcomer introduces himself as Damum. It then turns out that Damum is actually Hakuren's younger brother and also the youngest son of Drime. Damum explains that the only reason he came to the village is because he is currently running away from someone. Hearing that immediately makes Hiraku assume there must be some terrifying enemy chasing him down. Not long afterward, a massive dragon suddenly appears outside the village. At first, Hiraku assumes that dragon must be the dangerous foe Damum was talking about. However, the dragon quickly transforms into a young woman who introduces herself as Quan, the woman who is supposed to become Damum's future bride. For some reason though, Damum looks absolutely terrified of her. Drime quickly tries to calm the situation by awkwardly explaining that Damum simply has not been feeling very well lately. However, Quan's intimidating presence alone is enough to make even Drime start trembling in fear. Quan then explains that Damum has recently been avoiding her completely. According to her, he has even started standing her up during their dates. As she continues speaking, she slowly begins getting angrier and asks whether Damum is secretly planning to call off their marriage altogether. Before the situation can become even more heated, Hiraku suddenly interrupts and says he would like to speak with Damum privately first. Hiraku then takes Damum into a separate secluded room. At first, Damum immediately tries to run away again, but Hiraku stops him and tells him there is no point trying to escape because he will never truly be able to avoid Quan forever. Hiraku tells him to stop running and properly face the marriage like a man. However, Damum admits that he is still genuinely terrified of Quan. Damum then explains that there are several things Quan does that make him uncomfortable, and he wishes she would change those habits. According to him, if she fixed those issues, he honestly would not mind marrying her at all. After hearing that, Hiraku pulls out several sheets of paper and tells Damum to write a detailed letter explaining everything he wants his future wife to improve or change. While Damum works on the letter, Hiraku goes outside to speak privately with Quan. Hiraku explains to Quan that Damum is currently writing down all the things he expects from his future wife. However, Hiraku also tells her that marriage is not simply about obeying everything one person says. He explains that Damum also needs to understand and respect Quan's feelings as well. After saying that, Hiraku hands Quan some paper too and asks her to write down all of her own expectations and feelings regarding Damum. Quan agrees and heads into another room where she begins writing her own list. For quite a while, the two of them continue exchanging letters back and forth. Through those letters, they slowly begin understanding each other's feelings, worries, and expectations much better than before. Eventually, by the time they are ready to leave the village, both Damum and Quan have completely come to terms with the marriage and finally agree to move forward together peacefully. In the end, Hiraku and Hakuren simply stand there watching the two of them leave together, relieved that everything managed to work out in the end. The next day, the expedition team that had been sent out to investigate the recently discovered northern dungeon finally returned back to the village. They managed to come back successfully, bringing several bloody vipers with them after defeating the dangerous creatures during their exploration. Hiraku is clearly delighted when he sees what they brought back, and without wasting any time, he immediately begins preparing the meat so that everyone can have a proper meal. The group starts eating enthusiastically, stuffing their faces while thanking him for the delicious food. However, Hiraku does not want to take credit for something he did not personally do, so he quickly explains that it was actually Anne who prepared and cooked the meal for everyone, giving her the proper recognition she deserves. After that, Hiraku praises the expedition group for managing to bring back such a large number of bloody vipers. He points out that with this much meat, the entire village is going to be eating well for the next few months without worrying about running out of food anytime soon. As they continue eating, Hiraku asks the group whether they noticed anything strange or interesting near the northern dungeon during their journey. The group then tells him that they overheard some giants talking about hot springs that are located somewhere around the northern dungeon area, although they were not able to confirm the exact location themselves. When Hiraku hears this information, he immediately realizes realizes that there's a potential hot spring out there in the northern dungeon, so he quickly decides that they need to organize and send out another expedition as soon as possible to locate the hot springs. The girls look confused after hearing this, because they do not really understand what a hot spring is or why it is important enough to send another expedition for it. Hiraku then begins explaining in detail what a hot spring is, and after giving his explanation and doing a bit of convincing, they eventually agree with him and manage to put together a plan. Along with that, they prepare a special expedition team that'll locate the hot spring. When Lucy takes a closer look at the team that is preparing for the expedition, she is surprised to see that Hiraku himself is planning to join them on this trip. This surprises her even more because it has been ages since Hiraku ever left the village. Hiraku just says it's because he wants to start touching more grass and also wants to explore more areas now that things have settled down in the village. After everything that has happened, he feels it is a good time to step out more and see the world beyond what he has been managing so far. Tia and Granmaria think it would be better if they made contact with the giants by having the giants come to them first. However, Hiraku feels that approach might come across as rude or disrespectful to the giants, so instead he suggests that they continue into the forest themselves, meet the giants directly, and proceed carefully while doing so. Just then, Vargreif suddenly appears and asks if he can come along with them. Hiraku does not have any real objection to this, so he agrees without hesitation. Vargreif then learns that they are planning to walk all the way through the forest, and he tells them there is no need for that because he can simply teleport them instead. He opens a portal, and they are all transported deeper into the forest, near the mountain region. Hiraku realizes that he has never been this far out into the world before, and the scale of the area surprises him. Hiraku then sets his eyes on the dungeon entrance in the distance and prepares to enter with his group. However, at that moment, several giants suddenly come running out in panic. A moment later, a giant blood viper erupts from the ground, shocking everyone present. But what surprises them even more is when a massive earth rat bursts out from the ground as well and immediately buries the blood viper beneath it. The earth rat then immediately locks onto Hiraku and begins charging toward him. However, Hakurin and Lasti quickly move in to protect him. The girls then combine their powers and launch an attack to push the earth rat back repeatedly, but even after being hit, the creature refuses to stay down and continues fighting. Seeing that brute force alone is not enough, Hiraku summons his almighty farming tool and uses it directly against the earth rat, finally defeating it. After the battle, Hiraku speaks with the leader of the giants, who thanks him sincerely for stepping in and saving both him and his people from the situation. Hiraku then asks whether these earth rats have always been terrorizing their homeland. The giant leader explains that it was not always like this. According to him, a hole suddenly appeared in their dungeon, and that opening allowed the earth rats to start creeping into their territory. Hiraku quickly realizes that the expedition team he had previously sent out may have been responsible for creating that opening. Because of this, he takes responsibility and bows deeply while apologizing to the giants for the trouble caused. However, the giant leader tells Hiraku not to worry about it too much, saying that it is not entirely their fault either. Hiraku is glad that the giants are so understanding, so to help them out, he talks with the rest of the crew and they all decide to assist the giants with the situation. After discussing the problem further, the girls conclude that it would be a waste of time to simply try to fill the hole back up, so the better solution would be to eliminate all of the threats completely so they do not continue to come through. With that decision made, the group ends up splitting into two separate teams. One team will focus on eliminating the earth rats, while the other team will continue searching for the hot spring at the same time. Hiraku ends up being placed in the group that is assigned to search for the hot spring. He initially thinks he should be on the extermination team instead, since he also wants to help deal with the earth rats directly, but Vargreif tells him not to worry about it and insists that he should stay focused on his original goal of finding the hot spring. After hearing that, Hiraku and his assigned search party head out and continue their journey deeper into the forest in search of the hot spring location. After traveling for a while, they eventually come across a strange and unusually large tree that has deep claw marks carved into its surface. The size and depth of the marks immediately make them realize that a very large and powerful monster must have created them. Not long after they notice this, an enormous bear-like monster suddenly appears and is seen lurking behind them, preparing preparing to attack. However, before it can do anything, Hiraku quickly uses his almighty farming tool and takes it down instantly without much effort. After dealing with the monster, they continue their exploration further into the area. Eventually, they finally manage to locate the hot spring they have been searching for, but the water temperature is far hotter than they originally expected. Seeing this, Hiraku begins to wonder whether there might be a nearby volcano or some kind of geothermal source underneath the area that is causing the water to heat up so intensely. However, Tia is able to figure out that it is actually all the work of a hot stone. She carefully hovers the hot stone over to Hiraku and tells him to touch it. At first, Hiraku thinks it is going to be extremely hot and dangerous to touch, but when he actually places his hand on it, he is surprised to discover that it is not painful at all and is instead very nice and gentle. Tia then explains in detail that hot stones tend to release heat very slowly over long periods of time, and because of that slow and steady release, the heat gradually builds up and accumulates over time. This is exactly how it was able to keep the entire spring area consistently warm and comfortable for so long without cooling down. After a little while of discussion and planning, they begin working on a proper setup by creating two separate channels that divert water in a controlled way. One channel brings in hot water from the spring source, while the other channel brings in cold water from the nearby river. By carefully adjusting and balancing both streams, they are able to successfully create a hot spring that has just the right temperature. Not too hot and not too cold, but perfectly comfortable for bathing. As everything slowly comes together and the construction process reaches its final stage, Hiraku becomes more and more excited, eagerly looking forward to the moment he can finally take a dip in the hot spring. Meanwhile, Vargreif and the others head deeper into the dungeon and quickly realize that the dungeon is actually far larger and more complex than they originally expected. Because of its massive and confusing structure, they decide that it would be more efficient to split up into multiple smaller groups in order to cover more ground. Lucy takes leadership of one of these groups as they carefully walk through one of the long tunnels that was dug out by one of the earth rats. She suddenly begins to feel that something about the tunnel is very strange. The tunnel seems to continue endlessly forward without any clear end. She starts to wonder why an earth rat would dig so deep into the ground without any visible food source. This thought begins to make her suspicious, and she starts to consider the possibility that the earth rats might not be acting on their own and could potentially be controlled by something else entirely. Flora and Lucy both begin to seriously consider the idea of turning back for safety due to the growing uncertainty and lack of information, but Lasti confidently says that she is in the mood for a good battle and strongly persuades them to keep moving forward instead of retreating. They continue their journey deeper into the tunnel until they eventually come across a massive boulder that has strange inscriptions carved all over its surface. Above that boulder, they also notice what appears to be an exit leading upward toward another area, and they begin to consider taking that exit in order to regroup with the others outside. However, before they can make a decision, a large swarm of ghouls suddenly drops down from above and prepares to attack them all at once. Flora and Lucy quickly begin thinking about how to handle the situation in a calm and rational way, but Lasti immediately rushes forward without waiting and uses her powerful fire breath attack to wipe out the ghouls in one explosive burst. Unfortunately, her flames spread much further than intended and end up setting part of the surrounding forest and tunnel area on fire, forcing the rest of the group to quickly move in and clean up the mess and damage she caused. Thankfully, they manage to put out the fire in time before it causes any irreversible damage to the environment. At the exact same time, Hiraku announces that the hot spring construction is finally complete. The girls all take a look at the completed entrance and are extremely impressed that Hiraku was able to organize, design, and complete such a large project in such a short amount of time with limited resources. Hiraku then explains that the bathing areas have been separated into male and female sections, so everyone can use the hot spring comfortably without any awkward situations. Shortly after this, the girls are shown happily enjoying themselves inside the hot springs, relaxing in the warm water, and they admit that Hiraku was right all along, because the hot spring was really worth it. Hiraku is then seen in his own separate section of the hot spring, calmly enjoying the warm water. While relaxing, he begins thinking that in the future he will likely need to expand and further develop the entire hot spring area so that the entire village can eventually come here and enjoy the baths together. However, at that exact moment, Hiraku suddenly realizes that he has not seen Vargreif and his group for quite some time. This makes him wonder where they might have gone, whether they are still inside the dungeon, or if something unexpected may have happened to them. Meanwhile, Vargreif and his group are still deep inside the dungeon, clearly having some fun while wiping out a group of skeleton monsters. But deeper inside the dungeon, a powerful skeleton boss known as the Lord of Death is finally reborn. The moment he awakens, he declares that he will destroy the abhorrent seal no matter what it takes. By the time morning arrives, Vargreif and his team finally return from their underground investigation. Hiraku immediately asks if they managed to figure out why monsters had been appearing on the surface. Vargreif explains that the problem was caused by a massive number of undead hiding beneath the ground. However, Harem quickly drove all of them away, so he believes the village should be safe from monster attacks for a while. Vargreif admits that he wanted to investigate the underground area more carefully and learn more about what was happening. Unfortunately, before he could do that, everything had already turned to ashes. Hiraku understands that part, but there's something else that completely confuses him. Standing beside Vargreif is a small child, and Hiraku has no idea who she is. Vargreif then calmly explains that the little girl is actually the leader of the undead monsters. Hiraku is completely shocked because he never imagined that the leader of such a terrifying group of monsters would turn out to be a little girl. It's then revealed that the child is actually the same Lord of Death from earlier. Apparently, Harem encountered her underground, ripped off her skeleton head, and blasted her with powerful fire breath. But instead of destroying her completely, the attack somehow transformed her into the form of a young girl. On top of that, she seems to have lost all of her memories. Because of this, Vargreif feels she won't mean them any harm, so he didn't have the heart to simply abandon her underground by herself. Hiraku understands Vargreif's reasoning and agrees that bringing her back to the village was the right decision. Hiraku then goes down in front of the girl and gently asks for her name. The little girl introduces herself as Urza, and she confirms that she can't remember a single thing from the past. It's then revealed that long ago, Urza suddenly awakened from a deep sleep as the Lord of Death. When she woke up, she no longer remembered who she used to be. The only thing she knew was that she was now called the Lord of Death. Something mysterious had awakened her and given her a single order: destroy the seal placed on the land. With no memories and nothing else to guide her, Urza simply obeyed the command. She first created several earth golems. Even though the golems were weak fighters, they were extremely useful for digging tunnels underground. The earth golems continued digging non-stop until they finally discovered one of the seals. For the first time, Urza felt satisfied, believing she had completed her task. However, she soon sensed that there were still more seals hidden somewhere underground. Because of that, she ordered the golems to keep digging deeper and deeper. Eventually, they discovered a cave filled with skeletons. Using her powers as the Lord of Death, Urza brought the skeletons under her control and made them help with the digging as well. As time passed, Urza's forces continued to grow. She even tamed giant moles to make the digging process faster and more efficient. But during all those years, Urza slowly began questioning herself. She wondered if endlessly digging holes was really the purpose of someone as powerful as the Lord of Death. Still, since she had nothing else to do and no other purpose in life, she simply kept following her orders. For decades, Urza and her army continued digging underground. Eventually, they finally discovered another black stone seal. Everyone celebrated the achievement together. Even though they had no idea how many seals still remained, they swore that they would eventually find and destroy every single one of them. But before they could continue their mission, Harem suddenly appeared and kicked her face in. After that attack, Urza transformed into the little girl she is now and lost all memory of what had happened. Back in the present, Tia and the others question Hiraku about whether it's really a good idea to let Urza stay in the village. Hiraku replies that they should at least take care of her until she regains her memories. One of the girls then notices Urza's name and says it reminds her of the legendary hero queen. For a brief moment, she wonders if Urza could actually be that same person, but she quickly dismisses the idea because it sounds far too unbelievable to be true, and then asks Hiraku if it would be alright for her to take Urza to have a bath, and Hiraku agrees without hesitation. At the same time, Hiraku and Vargreif are relaxing together in a hot bath. Vargreif especially seems to be enjoying himself. However, while they soak in the water, Vargreif brings up an important point. Even if all the monsters monsters in the dungeon are gone for now. They should still seal the dungeon entrance to stop new monsters from entering in the future. Still, before dealing with that problem, the two of them decide to relax in the bath a little longer. At the same time, after Anne finishes giving Urza a bath, it becomes clear that Urza isn't enjoying the hot water very much because her skin is extremely sensitive. Wanting to feel more comfortable, Urza asks Anne to join her in the bath, saying it would make her feel better. Anne agrees and gets into the bath with her. However, things suddenly become awkward when Hakurin and Lasti walk into the room and see the two of them bathing together. Embarrassed, Urza immediately runs out of the bath while blowing raspberries at them, and Anne quickly chases after her. After some time passes, Kaibit finishes taking her own bath and feels completely refreshed. She then tells Hiraku and Tia that she plans to return to the Kingdom of Garlet because she still has priestess duties she needs to handle there. Hiraku and Tia wish her a safe journey, and not long afterward, Kaibit flies away. With everything settled for the moment, Hiraku decides to head underground to inspect the strange black stone seal that Vargreif mentioned earlier. At first glance, the stone doesn't seem unusual at all, but after observing it more carefully, Hiraku starts to notice a strange aura leaking out from the stone. Sensing that something is wrong, Hiraku pulls out the almighty farming tool and strikes the purple aura with it. The moment he does, the strange aura becomes suppressed. When Hiraku explains what happened to the others, they are confused because apparently he is the only person who could see the strange aura in the first place. Hakurin briefly considers destroying the black stone completely, but she quickly realizes that doing so would probably collapse the entire cave. Instead, Hiraku transforms the almighty farming tool into a chisel and decides to carve the stone into a sculpture of the gods. He believes that the divine essence of the gods would easily overpower the dark energy he sensed coming from the stone earlier. After finishing the sculpture, Hiraku suggests burying it underground so nobody can move it. However, Vargreif strongly disagrees with the idea. He argues that a statue as magnificent as this deserves to be seen instead of hidden away underground. Because of Vargreif's opinion, they decide not to bury the statue after all. Vargreif even helps create more statues to act as protective charms against evil, and several of them are eventually placed above ground as well. Vargreif thanks Hiraku for listening to his advice and choosing not to bury the sculptures. However, Vargreif also warns Hiraku that there are probably far more secrets hidden within those underground tunnels than they currently realize. After saying that, he opens a portal and announces that he's heading back to the hot springs first so he can prepare for a proper underground expedition later on. After Vargreif leaves, Hiraku notices that Hakurin suddenly flies away without saying a single word. Curious, he turns to Lasti and asks if something is wrong. Lasti quietly apologizes to Hiraku, saying she feels useless and believes she hasn't been much help to him. Hiraku immediately disagrees and reminds her that she helped defeat a large number of monsters during the battle. However, Lasti explains that even though she did help fight the monsters, she still feels responsible for burning down part of the forest. Hiraku had warned her not to use her fire breath, but she ended up using it anyway. Even so, Hiraku feels the situation is actually his own fault because he was the one who sent her on such a dangerous mission in the first place. Because of that, he apologizes to her instead. Lasti quickly tells him not to apologize so much. She says that someone important like him shouldn't constantly lower himself by apologizing to others. Hiraku understands what she means and promises to keep her advice in mind. Afterward, Hiraku goes to check on Hakurin, who still seems upset. However, it turns out she was simply worried about his safety the entire time. Once they talk things out, the misunderstanding is quickly resolved between them. Meanwhile, Vargreif and his underground team continue searching for more black stones deep within the tunnels. During their search, they come across an unfinished tunnel, so they decide to keep digging farther ahead. By the end of the day, they successfully discover 3 more stones. When the group returns to the surface, they complain to Hiraku about how exhausting the work underground has been. Hiraku then asks if he should join them next time to help out, but they quickly refuse and tell him to stay behind because the underground tunnels could be extremely dangerous. Even so, Vargreif and the others continue their search underground day after day, endlessly digging through the tunnels in hopes of finding the final stone. However, after searching for such a long time without finding anything, they slowly begin to wonder if the last stone even exists at all. Despite their doubts, none of them are willing to give up, so they continue digging anyway, spending Spending so much time trapped underground eventually starts affecting the girls mentally. The endless digging and isolation begin wearing them down more and more. But after an incredibly long search, they finally discover the final stone. The moment they find it, the girls immediately collapse onto the ground in relief because the exhausting search is finally over. Right after returning to the surface, they head straight for the hot springs to relax and recover from all the hard work. Seeing how completely exhausted everyone looks, Hiraku decides he should prepare some kind of special reward to thank them for all their efforts. However, Vargreif quickly reminds Hiraku that there is still plenty of work left to do because all of the stones now need to be carved into statues of the gods. Watching how excited Vargreif suddenly becomes makes Hiraku realize that creating the statues was probably the real reason Vargreif was so eager to search for the stones in the first place. Elsewhere, a giant meteorite is falling from the sky toward a mountain. As it races through the air, a voice introduces itself as the Archfiend, the embodiment of evil. The Archfiend recalls how he has spent more than 1,000 years waiting patiently for the perfect moment. During all that time, he has held onto a single goal, taking revenge on the gods who defeated him long ago. The meteorite finally crashes into the mountain with tremendous force, shaking the surrounding area. Meanwhile, Hiraku and the villagers are enjoying a large feast. The celebration is being held to mark their safe return from the hot spring region. Everyone is in a cheerful mood, eating good food and spending time together after their successful trip. Hiraku walks over to the group of girls and thanks them for all the hard work they put in during the journey. They happily accept his gratitude, but Tia is still annoyed when she thinks about Vargreif. She complains about how troublesome and irritating he was throughout the trip. Grandmaria notices that Tia is still focused on the issue and suggests that everyone stop worrying about it for now. Since they are having a celebration, she believes they should simply relax and have fun, even while enjoying the feast. Hiraku cannot help thinking about everything that happened during their journey. He remembers how Lu's group managed to discover 7 mysterious stones. After they returned, Hiraku made sure that each of those stones was carved into statues representing the gods. He also recalls the strange dark aura that surrounded the stones before. Since that aura has now disappeared completely, Hiraku hopes that whatever danger it represented is finally gone and that everything will remain peaceful. As Hiraku continues walking around the feast, he suddenly notices a familiar face among the guests. To his surprise, Bezel is attending the celebration. Hiraku did not expect to see him there, so he immediately asks what brought him to the village. Bezel explains that he happened to have some free time available. Since he was not busy with work, he decided to visit and join the celebration. Hiraku welcomes him and is glad to see him enjoying himself with the villagers. Before they can continue their conversation, something nearby catches their attention. They notice Gratz openly confessing his feelings to Renana in front of everyone, and Renana appears to be returning the energy. Bezel explains that Gratz had been eager to come to the village for quite some time. Apparently, he missed Renana so much that he repeatedly begged Bezel to bring him along. In the end, Bezel finally gave in and allowed him to come. Seeing the two of them together, Hiraku is happy that their relationship seems to be progressing smoothly. As the celebration continues, Hiraku notices Drime sitting with another man while enjoying a drink. Curious about the stranger's identity, he asks Bezel who the man is. Bezel explains that the guest is one of the 4 demon lords. In addition to being one of the most powerful figures in the demon race, he also serves as the Minister of Internal Affairs. Hearing this, Hiraku is surprised to learn that such an important person is casually attending the village feast alongside everyone else. The man's name is Randon, and Hiraku is surprised by how friendly and humble he is despite holding such a high position. As they continue talking and enjoying the feast, a small accident happens. A few drops of Randon's drink spill onto Drime's shirt. Randon immediately panics and drops to his knees, repeatedly apologizing. However, Drime simply laughs it off and tells him not to worry about it since it was only a minor mistake. A short while later, Vargreif arrives at the feast. Hiraku takes the opportunity to thank him for all the help he provided during their trip. Vargreif admits that the journey was extremely exhausting and put a lot of strain on him. Fortunately, the hot springs allowed him to rest and recover, leaving him feeling refreshed and energized again. While talking, Vargreif suddenly notices a cat sitting nearby. Curious, he asks Hiraku why he suddenly has a cat. Hiraku explains that he happened to come across the stray cat one day. The cat seemed unusually friendly, and since it did not appear to have an owner, he decided to take it in. The story story then shifts back to the Archfiend as he reflects on his past. Long ago, he fought against the gods in a great battle. However, he was defeated by the wicked gods and sealed away. For countless years, he remained trapped beneath the land. As time passed, he was supposed to slowly fade away and disappear completely. Yet the Archfiend refused to accept that fate. Instead, he clung to his hatred and continued waiting for the day he could finally take revenge on the gods who had defeated him. Unfortunately for him, things did not go according to plan. The statues of the gods that Hiraku created using the 7 stones suddenly activated. Their divine power began purifying the Archfiend's existence. Little by little, his consciousness started to fade away. The purification continued until the Archfiend was completely transformed and reborn as a cat. That cat turned out to be the very same stray cat that Hiraku later found and adopted. During the process, the Archfiend lost all of his powers. The terrifying being who once dreamed of destroying the gods was reduced to nothing more than an ordinary house cat, with no power left and no way to change his situation. He eventually accepted his fate and gave up on his plans for revenge. Meanwhile, high above in heaven, the gods observe what has happened. They watch as the former Archfiend now lives as a harmless cat. The chief god explains that the divine power within the statues granted the Archfiend salvation. Rather than being completely erased, he was purified and transformed into a cat. The chief god further explains that the Archfiend will live out the rest of his current life in that form. After the cat eventually dies, he will be reborn once more as the Archfiend. The god of agriculture then comments that Hiraku has essentially become an embodiment of divine blessings. The chief god agrees with this observation. However, he says that he has no intention of interfering with Hiraku's life. Rather than controlling him or directing his actions, he simply wants Hiraku to continue living peacefully and happily in his village. The god of agriculture then points out that the entire situation began because the chief god originally sent Hiraku to the forest of death. She reminds him that this decision was the reason so many unexpected events happened in the first place. In response, the chief god argues that despite everything, Hiraku has accomplished many good deeds and positively changed the lives of countless people. It is then revealed that the chief god had actually been punished for sending Hiraku to the forest of death. The other gods believed his decision had been reckless and irresponsible. However, after seeing everything Hiraku has achieved and realizing that the situation ultimately led to many positive outcomes, the punishment is finally lifted, which makes the chief god give off a little celebration. The next morning in the Great Tree Village, Urza is pestering Anne to read her a story about princesses. However, Anne is busy serving breakfast to everyone and does not have time to sit down and read. Seeing this, Hakurin offers to read a story to Urza instead. Unfortunately, Urza still does not seem to like her very much, so rather than accepting the offer, she simply sticks her tongue out at Hakurin and refuses. Even though Urza lost her memories, she has become one of the most energetic and cheerful people in the village. She is always eager to try new things and adapts quickly to her surroundings. Because of her outgoing personality, she gets along well with nearly everyone in the Great Tree Village. The only exception is Hakurin, and that fact is becoming increasingly obvious. Hakurin is clearly bothered by this. She notices that Urza seems fascinated whenever Lasti transforms into a dragon. Hoping to impress her, Hakurin transforms into a dragon as well. However, Urza barely pays any attention to her and remains focused on Lasti instead. This only makes Hakurin feel even more jealous. Hiraku and the village maids notice the awkward relationship between the two. The maids speculate that Urza's dislike of Hakurin might be connected to their first meeting. Back when Urza was still in her previous form, Hakurin had given her quite a beating. Even though Urza lost her memories, the maids wonder if some lingering feelings from that experience remain. The following day, Hiraku walks outside and notices Urza playing with soil. She is carefully shaping it into a small doll. Using her magic, she creates a control stone and places it inside the doll. For a brief moment, the doll comes to life and begins moving on its own. Unfortunately, the body is too weak to maintain its shape, and it quickly crumbles apart. Hakurin happens to witness the failed attempt and decides to help. She walks over to Urza and shows her one of her dragon scales. Without hesitation, Hakurin crushes the scale into a fine powder using only her bare hands. Urza then uses the powder to create a much stronger control stone. This time, when she places the stone inside the doll, the results are completely different. The doll becomes fully active and remains stable. Urza is delighted by the success and immediately thanks Hakurin for helping her. It becomes clear that Hakurin has finally earned her trust and friendship. The doll itself turns out to be far more powerful than anyone expected, because it effortlessly splits large logs in half as if they were made of paper. Everyone who witnesses the demonstration is amazed by its power. Later, Lucy sees the doll's performance and asks what happened. Hiraku explains how Urza created the doll and mentions that a dragon scale was used to make the control stone. Upon hearing this, Lucy is completely shocked. Dragon scales are considered some of the rarest and most valuable materials in existence. Very few people would ever have access to one, let alone use one so casually. What surprises her even more is how the scale was processed. Dragon scales are famously difficult to break down because of their incredible durability. So when Lucy learns that Hakurin simply crushed the scale into powder with her bare hands, she is left speechless. That revelation serves as another reminder of just how powerful Hakurin truly is. A little later, Hiraku notices that Ya and the elves are busy working on a new invention. They are trying to build a catapult and seem very excited about the project. As they continue working, Hiraku comes up with an idea. He suggests making the catapult much larger so that it can launch bigger objects over greater distances. Before long, the elves begin imagining all sorts of possibilities, including using it as an extremely powerful weapon. They bring the idea to Hiraku and try to convince him to support the project. However, Hiraku immediately turns them down. He has no interest in creating weapons, especially ones capable of causing large amounts of destruction. At the same time, he knows there is no point in trying to completely stop the elves from experimenting. Elves are naturally curious, skilled with their hands, and always eager to build something new. Instead of forbidding them from working on inventions, Hiraku simply gives them one rule. They are free to create whatever they want as long as it is not intended for violence or harming others. Not long after, they lose interest in the catapult project and begin looking for something else to do. Seeing this, Hiraku decides to give them a new challenge. He asks them to create a lid for one of his cooking pots. The elves immediately get to work. What seemed like a simple task quickly proves to be more difficult than expected. They spend a long time testing different ideas and making adjustments. After many attempts, they finally produce a prototype. Hiraku is impressed by the design and believes it might actually work. Unfortunately, the invention turns out to be a complete failure. Once the pot begins building up pressure, the lid launches upward with tremendous force and crashes into the ceiling. The experiment ends in disaster, forcing everyone to abandon the idea. Not wanting to give up, the elves move on to another project. This time, they attempt to create a massage chair. The chair is designed to relieve tension and help people relax. However, once they test it, they realize there is a major problem. The massage mechanism is far too powerful. Instead of feeling relaxing, it feels more like being attacked by a machine. While the chair is uncomfortable for most people, the elves actually enjoy it because their shoulders are much stronger and tenser than those of ordinary people. Even so, the invention is not suitable for general use, so Hiraku gives them another project. This time, he suggests something much simpler: springs. His goal is to create something that can make beds, seats, and other surfaces softer and more comfortable. The elves begin experimenting immediately. However, by the time they're done, they end up making the springs much larger and more powerful than Hiraku originally imagined. After seeing the results, Hiraku comes up with a new idea. Instead of using the springs for furniture, he suggests using them for large vehicles and horse-drawn carriages to create a smoother ride. There is only one problem, as the village does not actually own any horse-drawn carriages. To solve this issue, the elves travel on Lasti and visit Michael. They purchase a carriage and bring it back to the village. Once it arrives, the elves quickly install their newly created springs into it. The first test does not go as planned. The springs turn out to be much weaker than expected and fail to improve the ride very much. Fortunately, Ya is not discouraged. She confidently says that if the springs are too weak, they can simply make stronger ones. The elves continue improving their design and eventually create a much more powerful version. Excited by their progress, they decide to conduct a durability test. They take the carriage to the top of a ramp and send it flying off the edge, expecting it to land safely thanks to the springs. The landing is certainly successful, but the springs are far too powerful. Instead of settling back onto the ground, the carriage begins bouncing uncontrollably. Seeing this unbelievable sight, Hiraku asks how the springs became so absurdly strong. Hiraku then reveals the answer. answer. To reinforce the springs, the elves use dragon scales as part of the construction materials. After many more experiments, failures, and adjustments, the elves finally find a practical solution. Rather than continuing with the overly powerful coil springs, they switch to a more ordinary plate spring design. The finished product proves to be a major success. The springs make carriage rides significantly smoother and more comfortable, reducing bumps and shocks during travel. Even after completing the project, the elves show no signs of slowing down. Their curiosity remains as strong as ever, and they are already thinking about ways to improve their creations or develop entirely new inventions. A while later, the village decides to hold a fall festival, but the girls can't decide on a theme, no matter how long they talk about it. Suggestions start coming from every corner at once, and Hiraku watches the chaos for a while before deciding this approach isn't going anywhere. He digs out the raffle box and tells everyone to write their ideas down and drop them in, just like they did before. He does make one exception though: no martial arts competitions, because they all know exactly how that turned out last time. Once all the suggestions are in, Hiraku draws the first one, and it turns out to be a sliding competition. He has no idea what that is, so Florum explains that it's a traditional festival from the Bolden region where competitors race down hills. Hiraku figures that sounds pretty tame and safe enough, but Florum quickly corrects him. In the Bolden region, it's actually one of the most dangerous sports around, mostly because the competitors over there are enormous and smashing into each other on the way down is considered a completely normal part of the game. Hiraku decides to reach back into the box and try his luck again, so he pulls out another slip, but he ends being the sliding competition again. There's clearly no getting around it. They accept the outcome and start putting together a version of the event that won't end in disaster, with one firm rule at the center of it: deliberately crashing into other participants is not allowed under any circumstances. With the rules in place, they move on to building the venue. The immediate problem is that there are no hills anywhere nearby. They solve it by digging a large hole in the ground and using all the soil they pull out to build a hill from scratch, packing and shaping it into a proper slope. After that, they construct a full sliding course stretching from the top of the hill all the way down to the hole at the bottom. The whole build takes several days, but they see it through to the end, and when it's finally done, even Florum looks at it and admits it came out far better than she expected. That said, she thinks this could be a big tradition in the Great Tree Village for years to come. It doesn't take long for the fall festival to begin, and the sliding competition is about to start. The rules are simple. The participants would slide off the ramps on boards and into the water, and the winner would be decided by who slides the furthest, somewhat like ski jumping. Renana is the first participant to go, but on her first try, she doesn't build up enough momentum that would allow her to slide down properly. But she eventually gets the hang of it and manages to make a decent jump that earns her a respectable distance. Daga is up next, and he ends up having amazing board control from the very start of his run. Florum sees his technique along with the amount of distance he covered and figures he's probably going to set a new record with a performance like that. Flora is up next, and she gets a little overconfident along the way. Because of that, she loses control and ends up falling into the water before she can complete her run properly, putting her firmly in last place. Tia goes after her, but after she jumps off the ramp, she pulls out her wings and starts to fly in order to cover more distance. Unfortunately, doing that isn't allowed in the game, so Florum immediately announces that she's disqualified for breaking the rules of the competition. Lucy goes next after her, and she ends up putting on an incredible performance. Not only does she set a new record, but she even surpasses Daga when it comes to board control, leaving everyone impressed by her skill. The next contestant is Sina, but everyone notices that she's a little shy about going off the ramp because she doesn't want people to see her belly button. She spends some time hesitating and trying to gather her courage, though she eventually musters up the confidence she needs and dives off the ramp, after which everyone gives her a round of applause for overcoming her nervousness. It's now Rasashi's turn, but she does terribly and completely embarrasses herself in front of everyone watching. Not wanting to be the only one who looks bad, she tries to get Florum to embarrass herself too, so she tells her to stop standing around and have a jump herself. Florum tries to play it off by saying she's too busy with commentating duties, but Rasashi keeps pushing the issue, so Florum eventually gives in, changes into her swimsuit, and gets ready to jump. Though before she starts her run, she ends up using her wind magic to give herself a boost and increase the distance of her jump. Unfortunately for her, that's against the rules of the competition, so she ends up being disqualified as well. Everyone has high expectations for Lasty since she has a flying nature, and she manages to meet everyone's expectations perfectly. She puts on a spectacular performance and creates a massive splash when she lands, earning plenty of cheers from the crowd. With that aside, Florum announces that the competition has officially been concluded, and she names Daga as the winner based on the current standings. But she suddenly gets interrupted when Zabuton pulls up out of nowhere and dives off the ramp with his spinning jump. The move is so impressive and covers so much distance that it ends up being enough to make him win the competition over Daga, completely changing the final results at the last moment. A few days later, Hiraku marks a new milestone as a father as Alfred takes his first steps. Lucy immediately runs over the moment Hiraku mentions it, and she feels really proud, realizing Alfred has grown so much since he was born. They begin wondering how long it'll take before Alfred starts to talk and whose name he's going to say first. Everyone expects it to either be Mom or Dad, but they're all shocked the moment Anne picks him up and he says her name instead. Everyone immediately gets charmed upon hearing this, and they all start trying to get Alfred to say their names as well. Once the news spreads, the villagers swarm around Alfred with the hope that he'll eventually say their names too. Before long, he becomes the center of attention throughout the entire village. A couple of days later, Fushu returns to the village and first of all thanks Hiraku for the antidote he and his people made for her son because it was very effective. She explains that her son's condition improved greatly after taking it, and she's extremely grateful for everything the village did to help him. She then turns her attention to the new residents she brought with her for the village. Hiraku is glad to see that they're mostly male residents since there'd been a lack of male residents in the village for quite a while now. With that said, Hiraku addresses the newcomers and warmly welcomes them into the village. A few weeks back, Fushu had been searching for ways to thank the people of the Great Tree Village for curing her son. During that time, she came to learn that the Great Tree Village was looking for new residents. That said, she immediately asked her guard to gather people who might be willing to relocate and send them over to the Great Tree Village. The guard initially suggested sending some slaves first, but Fushu refused because she didn't want such low-ranking individuals being sent over as representatives. She wanted to properly repay the village for everything they had done for her family, though the guard pointed out that no one was likely to voluntarily agree to go since the Great Tree Village was located in the heart of the Forest of Death. Even with that said, Fushu was aware that although the Forest of Death had plenty of frightening rumors surrounding it, the village itself had been doing well so far, meaning it couldn't possibly be as terrible as people claimed. She decided to put up posters asking for volunteers, but no one ended up stepping forward because they were too scared to enter the Forest of Death. With that plan failing, the guard suggested offering the opportunity to the homeless people living in their town because it was essentially free food and free shelter for them. As expected, it didn't take long before all the homeless people in the town gathered together, ready and willing to go. Fushu went ahead and took her time educating them so they'd be able to communicate and relate with the members of the Great Tree Village properly. She even went as far as stripping the titles from those who came from noble families just so there wouldn't be any complications once they arrived. When they eventually asked where it was they were being sent, Fushu just smiled and told them it was a place that was going to become their new homeland because she didn't know how they'd react if she told them it was located in the Forest of Death. Back in the present, the new villagers are really impressed and find it somewhat unreal that they're going to get to live there for free. Mamu arrives shortly afterward and informs all the new residents that she's going to be the one taking care of them, so they should feel at home and not hesitate to ask if they need anything. The villagers then begin settling into life in the village. However, Hiraku later finds out that they aren't really accustomed to hard labor like farming and other physically demanding work. So instead, he decides to put their reading and writing skills to good use and has them transcribe books and important documents. He even makes stamp presses and lets them try printing for the first time. After watching them work with the equipment for a while, he realizes that the printing industry might actually have a future in the village. Hiraku also finds out that many of them have the ability to summon sprites, and that ends up making small household chores much more convenient throughout the village. Then, after a little while, Hiraku throws a small banquet to celebrate and welcome the new residents properly. But along the way, he discovers that they're actually scared of Lee and the other elves because they believe elves are man-eaters. Lee quickly clears that misunderstanding up and explains that it's nothing more than a myth. She adds that they're probably confusing elves with a race that she considers inferior to them. Then, to demonstrate how capable elves are, she shows off her incredible speed. Unfortunately, that demonstration only ends up making the new residents even more frightened than before. That aside, everyone spends the rest of the night getting to know the new residents better while enjoying the banquet together. But what none of them know is that a small castle is floating high above their village. Inside that mysterious castle, a strange figure watches their every move from above with a light smirk on his face. That was episode 10. Subscribe to not miss the next part and watch the next video on screen.
Make sure to subscribe or this little guy might get sad. Seriously, if you subscribe, this dog will love you forever. So hit that button right now.